blood sample sits in a vial no bigger than your thumb. Inside, microscopic particles drift through preserved serum, suspended in liquid that was once part of a flower growing in West African soil 400 million years ago. Under a microscope, the virus looks almost beautiful, geometric, crystalline, like something designed by an architect rather than evolved through natural selection. This is the Progenitor Virus, the mother of every nightmare that follows, and before Umbrella Corporation turned it into a weapon, before it created zombies and tyrants and creatures with too many teeth and not enough humanity, it was just biology. Dangerous biology, yes, but neutral, waiting for someone to recognize what it could become. That recognition would cost millions of lives. Over the next several hours, we're walking through every major virus, parasite, and bioweapon organism in the Resident Evil franchise. Not just what they do, but how they were created, why they were created, who paid for their creation, and what happens when containment fails. By the end, you'll understand the complete biological arms race that turned pharmaceutical research into an extinction-level threat, and why that threat was never really about science. It was about profit, power, and the kind of ambition that doesn't stop even when the body count reaches the millions. If this kind of deep dive into game lore is your thing, go ahead and hit that like button so other fans can find this video. And drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how many of you are part of the late night crew checking in from everywhere. Get comfortable, turn down those lights, and let's begin. Every virus in Resident Evil traces back to one simple truth. Someone believed they could control evolution. They were wrong. Chapter 1, The Flower That Bloomed Death, 1966. West Africa. 3 men stand in a garden that shouldn't exist. Dr. Oswell E. Spencer, Dr. James Marcus, and Dr. Edward Ashford have traveled to a remote region near the ancient Ndapaya Kingdom, following historical records that speak of flowers with impossible properties. Local legends describe a plant called the Stairway of the Sun, blooms that grant visions, that heal the sick, that allow communion with ancestors. Folklore wrapped around something real. The 3 men aren't anthropologists. They're virologists with military funding and pharmaceutical ambitions. They've come because those legends might translate to profit. What they find exceeds every expectation. The Stairway of the Sun grows in a specific microclimate, fed by underground water sources and soil composition found nowhere else on Earth. The flowers are beautiful, crimson petals with patterns that seem to shift in certain light. But beauty isn't why the 3 men collect samples with hands that shake slightly despite their professional training. Inside the cellular structure of these flowers lives a retrovirus, unlike anything previously documented. It doesn't just infect cells, it rewrites genetic code with precision that suggests millions of years of evolutionary refinement. The virus can cross species barriers that normally prevent genetic exchange. It can trigger mutations that would ordinarily require generations to manifest. And most importantly, for 3 men with bioweapons applications in mind, it can transform living organisms into something stronger, more aggressive, more controllable. They name it the Progenitor Virus, the ancestor, the source from which all subsequent creations will descend. On December 4th, 1967, the 3 researchers successfully synthesize the Progenitor Virus in laboratory conditions. They've isolated it, stabilized it, and proven it can be reproduced outside its natural environment. This is the moment when a naturally occurring retrovirus becomes a weapon waiting to be refined. But natural progenitor has a problem. It's too lethal. 99.9% of organisms infected with raw progenitor simply die. The virus rewrites genetic code so aggressively that cellular structures collapse, hearts stop, nervous system short circuit. The host organism essentially tears itself apart at the molecular level. For most researchers, this would signal the end of the project. A virus that kills everything it touches isn't useful as a weapon, it's just poison with extra steps. Spencer, Marcus, and Ashford see potential where others would see failure. That 0.1% survival rate means some organisms can withstand the genetic rewriting, and those organisms don't just survive, they transform, increase cellular regeneration, enhanced physical capabilities, behavioral changes that make them aggressive and territorial. If you could identify what makes that 0.1% different, if you could isolate the genetic factors that allow survival, you could theoretically create a virus that transforms without killing, a pathogen that turns ordinary organisms into biological weapons while keeping them functional enough to follow basic commands. The three men form Umbrella Corporation in 1968, using Spencer's inherited wealth and connections to build a pharmaceutical empire that serves as cover for bioweapons research. The public face of Umbrella produces legitimate medicine, antibiotics, vaccines, treatments for common illnesses. This generates profit, maintains respectability, and provides perfect justification for maintaining level 4 biosafety laboratories where the real work happens, underground, in facilities hidden beneath Umbrella's legitimate operations. Teams of researchers begin the process of modifying Progenitor. They need to reduce its lethality while maintaining its mutagenic properties. They need to create stable strains that produce consistent results rather than random mutations. And they need to do this without attracting attention from regulatory bodies, ethics boards, or governments that might object to weaponizing diseases. This requires test subjects, lots of them. Umbrella begins quietly recruiting human test subjects through methods that won't generate missing persons reports. Homeless individuals who won't be missed, immigrants without documentation, psychiatric patients from institutions willing to transfer difficult cases for the right price. The company also uses prisoners from countries with less stringent human rights protections, paying officials to look the other way while condemned criminals become research material. The early experiments are catastrophic. Subjects injected with progenitor variants experience organ failure, neurological collapse, and death within hours or days. The few who survive longer develop tumors, lose cognitive function, or go violently insane before dying. Bodies are incinerated, records are falsified, and the research continues. Edward Ashford dies in 1968 from accidental exposure to progenitor during laboratory work. His death is a reminder that the virus doesn't care about intentions or credentials. It kills indiscriminately unless the host possesses specific genetic compatibility. His son, Alexander Ashford, inherits his father's position within Umbrella, but the loss creates a power vacuum that allows Spencer to consolidate control. By 1970, Umbrella has refined Progenitor into several stable strains, each with different properties, but they still haven't solved the core problem: how to create predictable, controllable mutations that produce weapons rather than just corpses. That breakthrough comes from Dr. James Marcus, working in a facility called the Arclay Laboratory, hidden in mountains outside Raccoon City. Marcus is brilliant, obsessive, and completely uninterested in ethical constraints. He views human test subjects the way other researchers view petri dishes, as vessels for experimentation disposable when they stop providing useful data, This mindset makes him valuable to Umbrella and dangerous to anyone near him. His breakthrough involves leeches. Marcus discovers that modifying progenitor with leech DNA creates a strain that's significantly less lethal while retaining mutagenic properties. Leeches have remarkable regenerative abilities and can survive in diverse environments. By incorporating segments of leech genetic code into progenitor, Marcus creates a virus that allows host organisms to survive the initial infection long enough for mutations to stabilize. He calls it the tyrant virus, the T-Virus. On September 19, 1978, Marcus successfully creates the first stable T-Virus strain. His test subjects are leeches themselves, thousands of them kept in tanks in the Arklay facility's basement. When infected with this new strain, the leeches grow larger, more aggressive, and develop a disturbing tendency to swarm and attack as coordinated groups. But Marcus isn't interested in weaponized leeches. He's interested in what the T-Virus can do to larger organisms, to primates, to humans. The T-Virus solves progenitor's lethality problem, but creates a new issue. It makes infected organisms extremely aggressive and degrades higher brain function. A human infected with T-Virus experiences rapid necrosis of brain tissue, particularly in regions controlling reasoning, impulse control, and pain response. What remains is a creature driven by basic survival instincts, primarily the need to feed. These creatures are later called zombies, though that term doesn't quite capture what they actually are. They're not undead. They're still technically alive with functioning cardiovascular and respiratory systems. But the T-Virus has destroyed enough neurological tissue that they're operating on pure hindbrain impulses. They don't think, they don't plan, they just hunger. And they're contagious. The T-Virus replicates in saliva, meaning a bite from an infected organism transmits the virus to the victim. That victim will experience fever, nausea, and progressive neurological decay over the next several hours before transforming into another zombie. This creates exponential spread. One infected can create dozens. Those dozens can create hundreds, and containment becomes exponentially more difficult. For Umbrella, this isn't a problem, it's a feature. The goal was never to create soldiers who could think and strategize. That would require maintaining full brain function, which means the organisms would retain free will and could refuse orders. The genius of the T-Virus from a weapons perspective is that it creates threats that don't need commands. You deploy them in enemy territory, and they naturally attack any living humans they encounter. They're self-replicating, require no logistics or supply chains, and will continue spreading until either they're destroyed or they run out of hosts. This is biowarfare reduced to its most elegant and horrifying form. Turn your enemy's population against itself. Watch infrastructure collapse under the weight of trying to contain the outbreak, then move in after the chaos has done most of the work. But zombies, while effective at creating chaos, aren't Umbrella's ultimate goal. They're too weak individually, too easy to destroy with conventional weapons, too mindless to use strategically. What Umbrella really wants is something stronger, something that can take damage and keep fighting, something that can follow basic commands while retaining enough aggression to be a threat. They want a tyrant. The Tyrant Project begins in earnest in 1988, led by Dr. William Birkin, a prodigy who joined Umbrella at age 15 and quickly became one of their most valuable researchers. Birkin's assignment is clear: use the T-Virus to create a bioorganic weapon that exceeds human capability in every meaningful way while remaining controllable enough to deploy strategically. The challenge is genetic compatibility. Most humans infected with T-virus become zombies. Brain function decays, motor control degrades, and what emerges is just another shambling corpse. Umbrella needs hosts whose genetic makeup allows them to survive infection with higher brain function intact. Research reveals that only about 1 in 10 million people possess the necessary genetic traits. This creates an immediate problem. Finding suitable candidates requires screening enormous populations, and even then, success rates remain microscopic. The first successful tyrant is created in 1988 using a host whose name has been lost to Umbrella's incomplete records. The creature stands nearly 8 feet tall, with massively overdeveloped musculature, elongated limbs, and a heart so enlarged it protrudes from the chest cavity. Its skin has a gray-green pallor, and its facial features have degraded until it barely resembles anything human, but it's strong, impossibly strong. The tyrant can punch through concrete walls, shrug off gunfire that would drop a normal human, and kill with single strikes. And critically, it retains enough neural function to follow basic commands. Point it at a target, and it will destroy that target. Tell it to guard an area, and it will attack anything that enters. This is the proof of concept Umbrella has been pursuing for 2 decades. The T-virus can create controllable bioweapons far more effective than any conventional soldier. The problem is reproducibility. Creating tyrants requires finding those genetically compatible hosts, and they're vanishingly rare. Umbrella begins exploring ways to artificially enhance compatibility through genetic modification, pre-treatment with other compounds, or selective breeding programs. This is where the research diverges into dozens of parallel projects, each trying to solve the same core problem through different approaches. Some researchers focus on modifying the T-virus itself to reduce its neurotoxicity. Others work on genetic therapy that might make ordinary humans compatible with tyrant transformation. Still others explore combining T-virus with other pathogens to create hybrid strains with different properties. And one researcher, William Birkin, begins working on something that will make the T-virus look tame by comparison. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can understand the G-virus and what it represents, we need to see what the T-virus becomes when Umbrella starts modifying it for specific applications. Because the basic T-virus is just the beginning. What comes next is a catalog of horrors, each one designed for a specific purpose, each one proof that the question was never whether they should, but only whether they could. Chapter 2. The Tyrant Virus Family Tree. The T-virus isn't one pathogen. It's a framework, a base model that dozens of researchers modify for different applications. Think of it as a platform that can be customized, upgraded, and adapted depending on what kind of weapon you need to create. By 1990, Umbrella has developed multiple T-virus variants, each with distinct properties. Understanding these variants requires understanding what Umbrella is trying to accomplish with each iteration. The Epsilon strain is developed for rapid transmission. Standard T-virus spreads through bodily fluids, primarily saliva from bites. Epsilon is modified to remain viable in water supplies, allowing for widespread infection of urban populations without requiring direct contact. A single contaminated reservoir could infect thousands within days. Umbrella tests Epsilon in a small village outside Raccoon City in 1991. The entire population of roughly 200 people is infected through their water supply. Within 72 hours, the village is a mass of zombies attacking each other and anything that moves. Umbrella researchers document the spread rate, kill ratios, and how long infrastructure continues functioning before complete collapse. The village is then incinerated using white phosphorus to eliminate evidence. Official records attribute the incident to a gas leak. The Crimson Head variant emerges from research into why some T-virus infected organisms remain dormant for extended periods before reanimating. Umbrella discovers that certain zombies, if not fully destroyed, can enter a state of hibernation where the virus continues mutating tissue. When these creatures revive, they're faster, more aggressive, and have developed rudimentary problem-solving abilities like opening doors or using simple tools. Crimson Heads get their name from the blood-red skin tone that results from increased vascularization during the secondary mutation phase. They're significantly more dangerous than standard zombies, capable of sprinting and attacking with coordinated movements. Umbrella views this as a positive development. It means the T-virus can create multiple threat tiers from the same initial infection. The NE-T virus combines T-virus with the NE-alpha parasite, a separate organism that Umbrella has been researching for its ability to enhance host intelligence. Standard T-virus destroys higher brain function. The NE-alpha parasite prevents that degradation while still allowing the mutagenic effects to proceed. This creates the Nemesis program. Nemesis-type bioweapons retain enough cognitive function to use weapons, follow complex commands, and adapt tactics based on circumstances. The most famous example, designated Nemesis T-type, is deployed during Raccoon City's outbreak with a specific mission: hunt down and eliminate all remaining STARS members who survived the Arclay incident. The Nemesis is 8 feet of relentless bioweapon wrapped in a leather coat and equipped with a rocket launcher. It speaks barely in rasping single syllables, but it demonstrates problem-solving abilities far beyond any standard zombie. It can operate doors, weapons, and vehicles. It learns from encounters, changing tactics when initial approaches fail, and most terrifying, it's persistent. Damaging it doesn't stop it. The creature regenerates from injuries that would destroy lesser bioweapons. The NET virus represents Umbrella's holy grail, a bioweapon with the durability and aggression of a tyrant but with enough intelligence to function as an actual tactical asset. If they could mass-produce Nemesis units, they'd have an army that doesn't need supply lines, doesn't suffer morale problems, and will execute orders without hesitation or mercy. The catch is that NE-alpha parasite is difficult to produce and even more difficult to successfully integrate with T-virus without the host rejecting one pathogen or the other. Success rates hover around 10%, meaning 9 out of 10 attempts produce either standard zombies or creatures so unstable they have to be destroyed immediately. But 10% success on a potential super soldier program is enough to keep Umbrella funding research. Another significant variant is T. Cameron, developed at Umbrella's Antarctic facility under the supervision of Alexander Ashford. This strain focuses on cold weather survivability, creating infected organisms that remain mobile and aggressive even in sub-zero temperatures, where standard T-virus infected become sluggish or enter dormancy. T. Cameron zombies are found in the Antarctic facility during the events of T-Veronica, shambling through frozen corridors in conditions that should have shut down all biological activity. Their blood has effectively become antifreeze, preventing cellular damage from ice crystal formation. This variant proves that T-virus can be adapted to operate in extreme environments, which has implications for deployment in Arctic or high-altitude regions where conventional bioweapons would be neutralized by temperature alone. Then there's TJCCC-203, developed specifically for aquatic environments. Standard zombies sink and struggle to move effectively underwater. TJCCC 203 modifies lung tissue to allow limited water breathing and enhances muscle density to permit swimming. The resulting creatures can pursue targets through water, lurk in submerged areas, and attack from below the surface. Umbrella tests this strain on deep-sea fish and marine mammals first, creating grotesque hybrids that combine shark aggression with regenerative abilities. Human subjects infected with TJCCC 203 develop webbed extremities, enhanced oxygen efficiency, and a disturbing tendency to attack from below, dragging victims underwater to drown them before feeding. The point of cataloging these variants isn't just to list different monsters, it's to understand that each iteration represents a specific tactical application. Umbrella isn't creating bioweapons randomly, they're developing solutions to specific military problems. How do you infect urban populations quickly? Epsilon strain. How do you operate in Arctic environments? T. Cameron. How do you create intelligent soldier replacements? NET virus. This is industrial biowarfare, where research and development follows the same process as any other weapons manufacturing. Identify a need, develop a solution, test it extensively, then prepare for mass production and deployment. But every variant still traces back to the original T virus, which means they share the same fundamental weakness. They're designed to spread and kill, not to stop on command. An outbreak doesn't distinguish between enemy combatants and your own population. Once deployed, containment becomes nearly impossible. This is the paradox at the heart of Umbrella's entire operation. They're creating weapons they can't fully control, selling them to clients who don't understand the risks, and trusting that containment protocols will prevent catastrophic spread. That trust is misplaced, as Raccoon City will eventually prove. There's no such thing as acceptable losses when the weapon is contagious. But before Raccoon City burns, before the whole world learns what Umbrella has been creating in underground laboratories, one researcher makes a discovery that changes everything. Dr. William Birkin has been working on the T virus for over a decade. He understands its potential and its limitations better than anyone at Umbrella, and he's become convinced that viral weapons, no matter how refined, will always have the same fundamental problem. They kill the host's higher functions. What if you could create something that didn't destroy the host, but instead elevated them? What if you could make a virus that granted superhuman abilities while keeping the subject's intelligence intact? This question leads Birkin to a test subject who should have died years ago, but somehow keeps surviving everything Umbrella does to her. Her name is Lisa Trevor, and her body holds the secret to something far more dangerous than the T virus ever was. That secret becomes the G virus, and once it escapes containment, surviving becomes a lot more complicated than just avoiding bites. Chapter 3: When Evolution Becomes Cancer, 1988. Deep beneath Raccoon City, in laboratory corridors where screams don't reach the surface, a woman who should have died decades ago sits in a cell, waiting for researchers to hurt her again. Lisa Trevor is 25 years old, though her body doesn't reflect that. Decades of bioweapons experimentation have transformed her into something that barely registers as human. Tumorous growths cover her skin. Her spine has twisted. She wears a mask stitched together from the faces of her mother and other victims, a grotesque attempt to reconstruct the family that Umbrella destroyed. Lisa has been Umbrella's test subject since she was a child, infected with multiple virus strains, injected with experimental compounds, exposed to parasite implantation. She's endured everything that killed thousands of other test subjects, and impossibly she survives. Her immune system does more than survive. It adapts. When Umbrella implants an Ne-alpha parasite in Lisa's brain, the same parasite that creates nemesis-type weapons, her body rejects it, but not through normal immune response. Instead, her cells integrate the parasite's genetic material into her own DNA. The parasite dies, but its genes become part of Lisa's structure. This should be impossible. Parasites and viruses insert genetic material into host cells, but that material remains separate. Lisa's body is somehow incorporating foreign DNA directly into her genome and making it functional. Dr. William Birkin recognizes what he's witnessing. This isn't just mutation. This is directed evolution happening in real time within a living host. Lisa Trevor's cells have learned to weaponize infection, turning invading pathogens into raw material for transformation. Birkin extracts tissue samples from Lisa and begins isolating what makes her different. He discovers a unique genetic anomaly in her cells, a mutation that allows her DNA to remain stable even while incorporating fragments from other organisms. This stability is what lets her survive infections that would kill anyone else. By introducing this anomaly into a modified progenitor virus base, Birkin creates something entirely new. He calls it the Golgotha virus, the G virus. Unlike T virus, which destroys higher brain function, G virus keeps the host conscious and intelligent. Unlike progenitor, which kills most hosts outright, G virus infected individuals survive the initial transformation. And most significantly, G virus allows for continuous mutation. The host doesn't transform once and stabilize. They keep evolving, adapting to threats, developing new abilities in response to damage. This is adaptive evolution on a timescale of hours instead of generations. In theory, a G virus host could become nearly indestructible. Every time you damage them, they regenerate and adapt. Shoot them, and their skin thickens into armor. Burn them, and they develop heat-resistant tissue. Attack them with specific weapons, and their bodies learn to counter those exact threats. The host retains intelligence throughout this process. They're not mindless zombies. They're thinking, learning, evolving weapons. From a bioweapons perspective, this is revolutionary. A single G virus host could theoretically replace an entire military unit. Deploy them in combat, and they'll adapt to overcome whatever resistance they encounter. They don't need supply lines or support. They just need targets. But there's a problem. G-virus hosts are unstable in ways that make T-virus zombies look predictable. The continuous mutation doesn't stop. The host keeps transforming, keeps evolving, and those changes aren't always beneficial. Limbs multiply. Organs shift. The body becomes a mass of constantly regenerating tissue that eventually loses any resemblance to human form. And G-virus has another property that makes it uniquely horrifying. It can reproduce. Hosts develop an overwhelming biological imperative to implant embryos into other organisms. These embryos are essentially G-virus delivery systems wrapped in fetal tissue. When implanted, they'll gestate inside the victim, consuming them from within until a new G creature bursts out. But here's the critical detail. The embryo only fully develops if the host is genetically compatible. This means blood relatives, parents, children, siblings. If you implant a G embryo into a stranger, their body rejects it, and the embryo mutates into an unstable creature that dies within hours. This creates a reproduction system that's simultaneously elegant and grotesque. G-virus hosts are driven to find their family members and forcibly impregnate them with parasitic embryos. Those family members become either new G-hosts or temporary incubators for short-lived monsters. William Birkin completes his G-virus research in 1988. The same year the Tyrant Project achieves success. He's convinced he's created something that surpasses every other bioweapon Umbrella has developed. He's not wrong. Umbrella's leadership recognizes the G-Virus's potential, but also understands the risks. A weapon that continuously evolves and reproduces uncontrollably is dangerous to deploy. They authorize limited research, but prioritize T-virus programs that have more predictable outcomes. This infuriates Birkin. He spent years developing the G-Virus, using research that costs Umbrella millions of dollars and countless test subjects. He believes he deserves recognition, profit, and continued funding. When Umbrella tries to transfer his research to a different facility, Birkin refuses. He begins negotiating with the United States military directly, offering to sell G-virus samples to them and defect from Umbrella entirely. This is a death sentence. Umbrella doesn't allow researchers to leave with proprietary bioweapons data. On September 22, 1998, Umbrella sends a tactical team into Birkin's underground laboratory beneath Raccoon City with orders to retrieve all G-virus samples and terminate Birkin himself. The operation goes wrong in ways that will doom the entire city. Birkin is shot multiple times during the raid. Dying, watching his life's work being stolen, he makes a decision born from desperation and rage. He injects himself with a G-virus sample, betting that transformation is better than death. The virus works faster than anyone anticipated. Within minutes, Birkin's bullet wounds close. His body begins to mutate, muscles swelling, bones elongating, additional tissue growing from his torso. He's conscious throughout the process, feeling every cell reorganize itself into something stronger. Then he kills the entire Umbrella team that shot him. In the chaos, T-virus samples stored in the laboratory are released. The ventilation system pulls contaminated air into Raccoon City's sewer network. Rats become infected. Those rats spread into the city proper. Within days, Raccoon City's population begins showing symptoms. This is how the Raccoon City outbreak begins. Not from deliberate deployment, but from one desperate researcher choosing transformation over death and accidentally triggering a cascade that will kill over 100,000 people. William Birkin, now designated G. Birkin or simply G, becomes the primary threat in Raccoon City's underground. He's intelligent enough to recognize his daughter Sherry when he encounters her, but the G-virus's reproductive imperative overrides his paternal instincts. He's compelled to implant an embryo into her, making her the next G-host. This creates one of Resident Evil 2's most disturbing scenarios, a father hunting his own daughter not out of malice, but because the virus has hijacked his biology and is using his intelligence to accomplish reproduction. G. Birkin demonstrates everything terrifying about the G-virus. He adapts to damage instantly, blow off an arm, and he regrows it within minutes. His mutations escalate through 5 distinct forms, each more powerful and less human than the last. By his final form, he's a massive tumor with teeth, barely recognizable as anything that was once a person. But he's still technically alive, still thinking on some level, still pursuing his biological imperative, even as his body becomes a monument to uncontrolled mutation. The G-virus proves too unstable for Umbrella's purposes. Only 2 known hosts ever achieve stable infection, William Birkin himself and Curtis Miller, who injects himself with a G-virus sample years later during a separate incident. Both demonstrate incredible power, and both lose control as mutations progress. The virus is shelved as too dangerous for practical deployment, but research continues. Umbrella archives all data related to G-virus and that data eventually falls into other hands. Organizations that believe they can succeed where Umbrella failed. Groups that think they can control evolution itself. But before we see what happens when other corporations get their hands on Umbrella's research, we need to understand what happens when someone takes the T-Virus and pushes it in a completely different direction. Not toward strength or adaptation, but toward control. Toward creating bioweapons that serve a royal bloodline and operate in ways that blur the line between science and something that looks disturbingly like magic. This is where we meet the Ashford family's pride and poison, the T-Veronica virus. Chapter 4, Aristocracy, Insanity, and Ants That Dream. Some researchers approach bioweapons development with military precision, testing hypotheses through controlled experimentation. Others, especially those with inherited wealth and aristocratic delusions, decide to create viruses that will prove their genetic superiority to the world. Alexia Ashford falls firmly into the second category. Born in 1971 to the Ashford family, co-founders of Umbrella Corporation, Alexia is a prodigy in the most literal sense. Her intelligence exceeds genius level. She completes university education by age 10 and becomes a chief researcher at Umbrella's Antarctic facility at age 12. But Alexia's brilliance is matched by her narcissism and complete absence of empathy. She views ordinary humans the way entomologists view insects. Interesting specimens, nothing more. Her position within Umbrella gives her access to all existing bioweapons research, and she decides none of it is elegant enough. T-Virus creates mindless zombies. G-Virus produces uncontrollable mutants. Alexia wants something refined, something that grants power while maintaining the host's superiority, something worthy of her bloodline. She discovers the answer in ants. Specifically, she studies how queen ants control their colonies through pheromone communication. The queen doesn't physically dominate every ant. She broadcasts chemical signals that program behavior at a fundamental level. Workers, soldiers, and drones all operate as extensions of the queen's will through this biological network. Alexia becomes obsessed with replicating this system in humans. If she could create a virus that establishes that same hierarchical control, she could build an army that obeys her the way an ant colony obeys its queen. She begins with the T-Virus as a base, but modifies it extensively. Instead of leech DNA, she incorporates genetic material from a queen ant species known for particularly complex colony structures. The resulting virus is designated T-Veronica, supposedly named after the Ashford family's ancestor, Veronica, but really named after Alexia's own ego. T-Veronica is different from other viruses in Umbrella's arsenal in several critical ways. First, it allows the host to retain intelligence if they're genetically compatible and if infection occurs under specific conditions. Unlike T-Virus, which destroys higher brain function indiscriminately, T-Veronica can preserve cognition in hosts with the right genetic markers. Second, it grants the primary host, the queen, the ability to control lesser infected organisms through pheromone signals and possibly limited telepathic connection. This creates a biological command structure where one intelligent host commands an army of transformed creatures. Third, T-Veronica grants incredible abilities, enhanced strength, cellular regeneration, and most distinctively, control over insects and mutations that incorporate insect physiology. Wings, carapace armor, compound eyes. Hosts can develop these features while maintaining human intelligence. Alexia knows the virus is extremely dangerous. Most hosts die during infection. Those who survive but lack compatibility become creatures called albinoids, vaguely humanoid things with translucent skin and minimal cognitive function. But Alexia is arrogant enough to believe she's genetically superior to any test subject. She's an Ashford. The virus was designed by her genius mind. Of course she'll survive. In 1983, at age 12, Alexia Ashford injects herself with T-Veronica. Her body immediately begins to reject the virus. Pain, beyond anything she anticipated, rips through every cell. She realizes too late that even genius-level intelligence doesn't guarantee genetic compatibility. The virus is killing her. In desperation, Alexia places herself in cryogenic suspension, betting that frozen hibernation will slow the virus's progression and allow her body time to adapt over years instead of hours. She remains frozen for 15 years. During those 15 years, her twin brother Alfred Ashford maintains the Antarctic facility alone. He's not infected with T-Veronica, but he doesn't need to be. Years of isolation combined with obsessive loyalty to his sister and undiagnosed mental illness turn him into a threat just as dangerous as any bioweapon. Alfred develops dissociative identity disorder, creating an alternate personality based on Alexia that he dresses as and embodies. He maintains the facility, conducts experiments on prisoners sent to the Antarctic base, and waits for his sister to wake. When Alexia finally emerges from cryogenic sleep in 1998, the T-Veronica integration is complete. Her body has successfully adapted to the virus. She's achieved exactly what she intended: superhuman abilities combined with retained intelligence and complete control over T-Veronica infected organisms. But 15 years of having a virus actively mutating your cells while frozen has consequences. Alexia emerges changed in ways that extend beyond physical abilities. Her already minimal empathy has been completely eroded. Her narcissism has become megalomaniacal. She genuinely believes she's evolved into a higher life form and that humanity exists only to serve her. She demonstrates her power by transforming at will, shifting between human appearance and increasingly monstrous forms. First form, mostly human but with insect wings and enhanced physical capabilities. Second form, larger, more insectoid, with the ability to spit flammable blood. Third form, a massive creature that's more insect than human, with wings spanning dozens of feet and the ability to control fire. Throughout these transformations, Alexia remains conscious and intelligent. She speaks, she taunts, she demonstrates tactical thinking. This is what successful T-Veronica integration looks like: a bioweapon that's simultaneously a thinking person and a monster. She also controls every T-Veronica infected creature in the facility: zombies, albinoids, and specially created bioweapons like the Bandersnatch, creatures with extending elastic arms, all respond to her commands. She's created the biological hierarchy she intended, with herself as the uncontested queen. The problem with queens, though, is that they're uniquely vulnerable. Remove the queen, and the colony collapses. Alexia dies during the Antarctic facility's destruction, killed not by conventional weapons but by sustained specialized combat from individuals with anti-bioweapon training. Her death proves that T-Veronica, while powerful, still produces hosts that can be destroyed with sufficient force. But Alexia isn't the only T-Veronica host. Steve Burnside, a teenager imprisoned at the Antarctic facility, is forcibly infected with T-Veronica during the incident. Unlike Alexia, he doesn't have years of cryogenic adaptation. The virus transforms him rapidly into a creature with massive arm mutations and inhuman strength, but he retains enough consciousness to recognize Claire Redfield, who he's developed feelings for. In his final moments before the virus completely takes over, Steve attacks his father, already transformed into a zombie by standard T-Virus, protecting Claire even as his humanity slips away. He dies shortly after, demonstrating that rapid T-Veronica infection without preparation leads to transformation, brief retention of self, then death. Steve's body is recovered by Albert Wesker, who extracts T-Veronica samples for later research. This ensures the virus survives Alexia's death and the facility's destruction. T-Veronica represents the point where Umbrella's bioweapons research stops being purely scientific and starts becoming almost mystical. The idea that one host can telepathically or chemically control an army of infected organisms suggests possibilities beyond simple mutation. It hints at bioweapons that could genuinely serve as strategic assets rather than just deployed chaos, but it also demonstrates the danger of allowing ego to drive research. Alexia created T-Veronica not to serve Umbrella's goals, but to prove her own superiority. The virus was always about establishing her as a queen, not about creating practical military assets. This distinction matters because it shows how bioweapons research attracts a particular kind of broken personality, people who see power over life and death as validation, researchers who measure their worth by how much they can make flesh obey their designs, scientists who forget that the creatures they're creating used to be human, or in some cases still are. The T-Veronica virus eventually appears in later outbreaks, sometimes in modified forms, always as proof that Umbrella's research didn't die with the company. The data survived, the samples survived, and enough people believe they can succeed where previous attempts failed. But T-Veronica isn't the last major virus in Umbrella's catalog. Before the company collapses entirely, researchers develop several more variants, each designed for specific applications that earlier viruses couldn't achieve. We need to talk about what happens when you take bioweapons research underwater, when you decide that ocean environments need their own strain of infection, when you create something that turns the abyss itself into a hunting ground. This is the T-Abyss virus, and it proves that even drowning won't save you from Umbrella's ambitions. Chapter 5, The Ocean Has Teeth Now, 1998. A luxury cruise ship called the Queen Zenobia floats dead in the Mediterranean Sea, its engines silent, its decks empty of anything resembling human life. The passengers and crew haven't abandoned ship, they're still on board. They've just stopped being passengers and started being something else, something that moves through flooded corridors with movements that are part human swimming and part predator stalking prey. This is the work of the T-Abyss virus, and it represents Umbrella's recognition that 70% of Earth's surface is ocean. If you're going to create bioweapons for global deployment, you need variants that function in aquatic environments. The T-Abyss project begins in 2005, years after Umbrella's official collapse, but while remnant researchers continue working under different corporate banners. The company leading this research is Veltro, a bioterrorist organization operating under the guise of environmental activism. Veltro's public face claims they're trying to stop ecological destruction. Their actual operations involve developing aquatic bioweapons that can be deployed in ocean environments to devastating effect. They see the ocean as the ultimate deployment zone, vast, difficult to monitor, and full of populations that rely on marine resources. The T-Abyss virus is created by combining T-virus with genetic material from deep sea. Organisms, particularly species that thrive in the abyssal zones where pressure, cold, and darkness would kill most life forms. These creatures have evolved incredible adaptations, bioluminescence, extreme pressure resistance, efficient oxygen processing from water. By incorporating their genes into T-Virus, researchers create a pathogen that turns hosts into amphibious hunters. T-Abyss infection follows a specific progression. Initial exposure causes fever and disorientation, similar to standard T-Virus. But instead of brain tissue necrotizing and creating shambling zombies, T-Abyss infected individuals develop enhanced swimming capability, the ability to extract oxygen from water, and mutations that make them hydrodynamic. The resulting creatures are called ooze. Ooze retain vaguely human shapes, but their skin becomes translucent, revealing muscle tissue beneath. Their bodies produce a thick, gelatinous slime, hence the name that serves multiple purposes. It protects against pressure changes, allows them to slide through tight spaces, and makes them incredibly difficult to grip or restrain. Ooze can operate both underwater and on land, though they're most dangerous in aquatic environments. Underwater, they're fast and coordinated, attacking in packs with tactics that suggest retained problem-solving abilities. On land, they're slower but still dangerous, capable of surprising bursts of speed and showing more intelligence than standard zombies. Most disturbingly, ooze can infect others through the slime they secrete. Physical contact with an ooze transfers the virus, meaning you don't need to be bitten to become infected. Brush against one in a flooded corridor, and you've been exposed. Veltro tests T-Abyss on a massive scale using the city of Terra Grigia, a floating city built as an ecotourism destination in the Mediterranean. In 2004, Veltro releases T-Abyss into Terra Grigia's water systems, claiming they're exposing the city's false environmentalism. The infection spreads through the city's aquatic infrastructure within hours. Pools, fountains, water treatment facilities. Anywhere water flows becomes a transmission vector. Residents begin transforming into ooze. Panic spreads faster than the virus itself. The Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, BSAA, attempts containment but fails. Terra Grigia has to be destroyed using a satellite-mounted solar energy collection system called Regia Solis. The entire city is incinerated from orbit, along with everyone still inside, infected or not. 5,000 people die in Terra Grigia, most from the virus, many from the purging fire used to stop the outbreak. But destroying Terra Grigia doesn't eliminate T-Abyss. Veltro has deployed samples in other locations, including the Queen Zenobia, which becomes a floating laboratory and test site. The ship is deliberately infected, its lower decks flooded, and ooze are allowed to establish territory throughout the vessel. This creates an environment where every flooded hallway, every submerged room, every dark pool could contain something that used to be human and is now waiting in water that conceals it perfectly. The T-Abyss demonstrates several important evolutionary steps in bioweapons development. First, it proves that viruses can be tailored for specific environments without losing their core functionality. Second, it shows that transmission methods can be diversified beyond bites and fluid exchange. Third, it reveals that intelligent design can create bioweapons that establish ecological niches. Ooze don't just infect and die, they persist in aquatic environments, creating long-term contamination zones. The ocean becomes a potential reservoir for T-Abyss. Release it into shipping lanes, port cities, or fishing populations, and you create outbreaks that are nearly impossible to contain. Ships carry infection to new ports. Fish populations spread the virus through ecosystems. Coastal cities become ground zero for infections that emerge from their own water supplies. This represents biowarfare at an infrastructural level. You're not just attacking populations, you're contaminating the systems they depend on for survival. T-Abyss research also produces specialized bioweapons beyond standard ooze. Sea creepers are shark-based creatures infected with T-Abyss, combining the virus's mutations with a shark's natural predatory capabilities. They patrol deeper waters, attacking anything that moves with speed and ferocity that makes regular ooze look manageable. Gyotso are bioweapons created by combining T-Abyss with anglerfish genetics. They use bioluminescent lures to attract prey in dark environments, then attack with oversized jaws capable of crushing bone. They demonstrate tactical hunting behavior, using light to create false safety before striking. Wall blister are stationary bioweapons that attach to surfaces and inflate when prey approaches, exploding to spread infected tissue and T-Abyss contaminated fluids. They turn architecture itself into a weapon, making any surface potentially hostile. Each of these variants shows progression in how researchers think about bioweapons deployment. It's not enough to just create infected humans. The goal is to establish contaminated zones where every element of the environment becomes dangerous. The water you wade through, the walls you pass, the creatures lurking below the surface. The T-Abyss ultimately proves difficult to control for the same reasons all these viruses do. Once released, containment becomes exponentially more difficult. Ocean currents can carry the virus hundreds of miles. Marine life becomes mobile infection vectors, and detecting contamination in vast water systems is nearly impossible until outbreaks are already underway. Veltro is eliminated, and their T-Abyss samples are supposedly destroyed or secured. But as with every umbrella-derived virus, samples survive in black market circulation, intelligence agency freezers, and research facilities that believe they can improve on the design. The lesson Terra Grigia should have taught, that aquatic bioweapons are too dangerous to develop, is ignored in favor of the lesson that organizations actually learn. Aquatic bioweapons are incredibly effective, and we should refine them further. But T-Abyss represents just one branch of Umbrella's viral legacy. Other researchers took different approaches, exploring not how to make infections spread through water, but how to make them respond to specific psychological triggers. What if you could create a virus that only activates when the host experiences fear? What if you could build a pathogen that turns human emotion into the trigger for transformation? This question leads to one of the most psychologically cruel bioweapons ever conceived, not because it's the most lethal, but because it weaponizes survival instinct itself. This is the T-Phobos virus, and it proves that sometimes the real horror isn't what the virus does to your body, it's what knowing about the virus does to your mind. Chapter 6. Fear itself becomes the weapon. 2011. A remote island facility in the middle of nowhere. Prisoners arrive believing they've been selected for a rehabilitation program. They're fitted with bracelets that monitor their vital signs. They're told the bracelets will help track their progress. What they're not told is that the bracelets also inject them with T-Phobos virus and measure exactly when their fear response reaches the threshold for transformation. T-Phobos is developed by Alex Wesker, not to be confused with Albert Wesker, as part of a project seeking biological immortality. Alex has been diagnosed with a terminal illness and becomes obsessed with transferring her consciousness into a new body. The T-Phobos research is meant to identify individuals whose genetic structure and psychological profile make them suitable hosts for consciousness transfer. The virus itself is elegant in the worst possible way. T-Phobos remains dormant in the host system until they experience intense fear. The virus is specifically designed to activate in response to stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine that flood the system during panic. When these hormones reach certain levels, T phobos triggers transformation. This creates a weapon that lies dormant in infected populations until a crisis occurs. Release T phobos into a city's population, and nothing happens. Everyone goes about their normal lives completely unaware they're infected. Then create a crisis, a bombing, a mass shooting, a natural disaster, and suddenly everyone who experiences genuine terror begins to transform. Chaos creates more chaos. As infected individuals transform into creatures called afflicted, their attacks generate more fear, triggering more transformations in a cascading feedback loop. Panic becomes contagious both psychologically and virologically. Afflicted are similar to standard T-virus zombies, but with distinctive features. Their bodies are covered in lesions and exposed tissue, as though their skin is being rejected by the mutations occurring beneath. They're violent and mindless, attacking anything that moves. But unlike standard zombies, afflicted can be created instantly. The transformation happens within seconds of the fear threshold being crossed. This speed of transformation is strategically valuable. Standard T-virus requires hours to fully convert someone. T-phobos can create an afflicted in the time it takes for someone to realize they're in danger and panic. But here's where T-phobos becomes especially insidious. The virus creates a psychological weapon even before transformation. Once you know you're infected with T-phobos, fear itself becomes dangerous. You're constantly monitoring your own emotional state, trying to suppress panic, knowing that if you get too scared, you'll transform into a monster. This creates impossible situations. You're trapped in a facility with creatures hunting you. You need to run, hide, and fight to survive. But survival generates fear, and fear activates the virus. So you have to survive while simultaneously suppressing the exact emotional responses that survival situations trigger. Imagine being chased by something trying to kill you while knowing that if you let yourself feel the fear that naturally accompanies being chased, you'll become the thing doing the hunting. The psychological torture this creates is more devastating than many physical bioweapons. You're fighting your own biology, trying to override millions of years of evolution that created fear as a survival mechanism, knowing that the very instincts meant to keep you alive will kill you if they activate. Alex Wesker uses T-phobos to test prisoners on the island facility, measuring who can suppress their fear and who transforms. The winners who successfully avoid transformation are deemed suitable for consciousness transfer. The losers become afflicted and are used as additional threats to test remaining prisoners. The facility becomes a nightmare specifically designed to generate fear. Darkness, confined spaces, sudden attacks, psychological manipulation. Everything is calibrated to push prisoners toward their breaking point while the virus waits for that moment of pure terror. But T-phobos has a flaw that makes it less practical for mass deployment. Approximately 50% of infected individuals are naturally immune to the transformation trigger. Their brain chemistry or genetic structure prevents the fear threshold activation. They remain infected but never transform, regardless of how terrified they become. These immune individuals are called compatible in Alex Wesker's research. They can be fear response carriers, spreading the virus to others without ever transforming themselves. This creates a two-tier infection structure where some people are walking bioweapons waiting to activate and others are asymptomatic spreaders. For Alex's purposes, compatible individuals are ideal consciousness transfer hosts. For broader bioweapon deployment, this immunity rate makes T-phobos less reliable than viruses with higher conversion rates. However, The psychological warfare applications remain valuable. Deploy T-Phobos and then publicize what it does. Let populations know they might be infected. That fear will transform them. The resulting paranoia and suppression of normal emotional responses creates societal breakdown, even without widespread transformation. People stop trusting their own feelings. They suppress natural fear responses in dangerous situations, leading to poor decision making. They become hypervigilant about others' emotional states, attacking anyone who shows signs of panic before they can transform. The virus doesn't need to create monsters. Knowledge of the virus creates the breakdown. This weaponization of psychology represents an evolution in biowarfare thinking. It's not enough to create pathogens that kill or transform. The goal becomes creating agents that break populations mentally before they break them physically. T-Phobos research also produces several specialized variants and related creatures. Glasps are flying bioweapons created using T-Phobos and insect genetics. They inject victims with the virus while simultaneously inducing fear through their presence, actively trying to trigger transformation in anyone they attack. Revenants are bioweapons that appear to be standard afflicted, but demonstrate pack hunting behavior and limited tool use. They represent an attempt to create T-Phobos, infected, that retain enough cognitive function to coordinate attacks. The Uroboros virus also makes an appearance in Alex Wesker's research, though as a separate project. Uroboros deserves its own examination because it represents Albert Wesker's attempt to create something beyond bioweapons, a virus meant to force human evolution itself. But before we reach Uroboros and the megalomaniacal ambitions behind it, we need to address something that changes the entire paradigm of Resident Evil's biological horrors. Everything we've discussed so far has been viruses, microscopic pathogens that infect cells and rewrite genetic code. But in 2004, researchers in rural Spain discover something that's not a virus at all. It's a parasite, an ancient one. And it doesn't just infect your body, it hijacks your mind while leaving you fully conscious inside your own head, screaming silently while your body obeys someone else. This is Las Plagas, and it proves that viruses aren't the only way to weaponize biology. Chapter 7, The Parasite, that listens somewhere beneath a castle in rural Spain, sealed in underground caverns that haven't been opened in centuries. Something waits, not undead, not mutated, just dormant. Las Plagas is discovered in the region around a village that locals avoid, whispering about a cult that used to control the area before being suppressed by the Salazar family generations ago. The Illuminados cult believed in a religion centered around obedience, specifically obedience to those infected with a sacred parasite that granted unity of purpose and submission to higher will. The cult was eliminated. The parasites were sealed away by the Salazar family, and for hundreds of years, that's where the story ended, until Osmond Sadler, the cult's modern inheritor, convinces Ramon Salazar, the eighth Castellan of the Salazar family, to break the ancestral seal and excavate the old mining tunnels, unearthing what his ancestors had buried to protect the world. Las Plagas translates to the plague in Spanish, which undersells what it actually is. These are parasitic organisms, not viruses. They don't rewrite your DNA. They don't mutate your cells. Instead, they physically integrate into your nervous system, specifically attaching to the spinal cord and brainstem. Once attached, Las Plagas can receive and transmit signals. A dominant plaga can send commands to subordinate plaga hosts, creating a biological communication network. The hosts remain conscious and retain their skills and memories, but their decision-making is overridden by signals from whoever controls the dominant parasite. This is mind control, not metaphorical or psychological manipulation, but actual neurological hijacking, where your body obeys commands that aren't coming from your own brain. From a bioweapons perspective, this is revolutionary. Viruses create mindless zombies or uncontrollable mutations. Las Plagas create soldiers who retain their training and intelligence but follow orders with absolute obedience. You could theoretically infect military personnel, send them back to their units, and activate them as sleeper agents who will execute any command without question or hesitation. The parasite has several developmental stages. Initial infection occurs through ingestion or injection of plaga eggs. The eggs hatch in the host's digestive system, and larvae migrate through tissue toward the nervous system. This process takes several hours and is painful as the larvae burrow through organs. Once a larva reaches the spinal cord, it attaches and begins growing tendrils into neural tissue. The host experiences fever, nausea, and violent headaches as their nervous system is colonized. Memory becomes fragmented. Personality shifts. The host knows something is wrong, but can't stop the process. After approximately 8 hours, the plaga reaches maturity and full integration. The host's veins become visible through their skin, taking on a dark coloration from the parasite's presence. Their eyes develop a distinctive red glow, particularly in low light, a reflection of the plaga's own photosensitive tissues showing through the host's retinas. At this stage, the host is ganado, Spanish for cattle, which perfectly describes their status, their livestock for saddlers' ambitions. Ganados retain impressive functionality. They can use weapons, axes, chainsaws, crossbows, even firearms. They can communicate with each other in Spanish, though their speech is stilted and focused on hunting intruders. They can problem solve, setting traps and coordinating ambushes, all while their minds are enslaved to parasitic control. The truly horrifying aspect is that some level of the original personality persists. There's evidence that ganados are aware of what's happening but unable to resist. They're prisoners in their own bodies, watching themselves commit violence while screaming internally without the ability to stop. This is worse than death. Death is ending. This is continuation with all agency removed. Las Plagas also demonstrates physical defensive mechanisms. When a ganado is injured, particularly decapitation or severe head trauma, the plaga can emerge from the body to defend itself. The parasite extends. Whip-like tendrils, or in more developed specimens, transforms the entire upper body into a writhing mass of tentacles with teeth-lined orifices. These emergence forms show the plaga's true nature. It's not enhancing the human host so much as using the human body as a shell. When that shell is damaged beyond usefulness, the parasite reveals itself and attempts to preserve its own survival. Some hosts undergo more extreme transformations. Colmillos are infected dogs that develop exposed plagas and enhanced aggression. Novistadors are humans who've been implanted with plagas specifically modified to induce insect-like mutations. They grow wings, develop compound eyes, and can spit acid. The Regenerators are perhaps the most disturbing plaga-based bioweapon. These are humans injected with multiple plagas throughout their body, creating redundant control systems. The result is a creature that can regenerate from virtually any injury. Blow off a limb, and it regrows within seconds. Destroy most of the torso, and the remaining tissue rebuilds the damaged sections. The only way to kill them is to destroy every plaga inside them, which requires specialized equipment to even locate. Regenerators demonstrate constant pain responses. They wheeze and gasp as though struggling to breathe. suggesting the multiple plagas are placing enormous strain on the host's biology, but the parasites keep them alive and functional regardless of damage or suffering. Iron Maidens are a variant that develops extendable spikes across their body, likely a mutation triggered by specific plaga strains. They combine the Regenerador's durability with offensive capabilities, becoming nearly unkillable enemies that can impale victims from a distance. Sadler's plan is elegantly horrifying. Infect influential people, politicians, military officers, corporate leaders, and place them back in positions of power where they'll follow his commands. He specifically targets the U.S. President's daughter, Ashley Graham, intending to infect her and return her to America where the plaga will mature and allow him to control her. Through her, he'd have access to the president and the entire government infrastructure, its mind control at a geopolitical scale. But Sadler underestimates several factors. First, Leon Kennedy, sent to rescue Ashley, proves more capable than anticipated. Second, Ashley and Leon both become infected, but receive medical treatment that kills the parasites before full maturation. Third, Sadler's own arrogance makes him vulnerable to betrayal. Albert Wesker has been manipulating events behind the scenes, using Sadler's operation to obtain plaga samples for his own research. When Sadler is killed, Wesker retrieves plaga specimens and begins developing ways to combine parasitic control with viral enhancement. Las Plagas doesn't end with Sadler's death. The parasites have proven too valuable. Various organizations obtain samples and begin creating their own variants. Type 2 plagas are developed by removing the parasite's weakness to specific frequencies of sound. Original plagas could be incapacitated or killed using particular wavelengths, which limited their deployment options. Type 2 eliminates this vulnerability while maintaining all control functions. Type 3 plagas, also called Magini, appear in Africa several years later. These variants are optimized for rapid infection and can be deployed via injection rather than requiring ingestion. The Magini outbreak in Kijuju demonstrates how quickly plaga infection can overwhelm a population. An entire region becomes hostile within days. Magini show even more tool use than ganados, operating motorcycles, wielding machine guns, and demonstrating tactical awareness. They're soldiers with biological leashes, perfect for proxy warfare where you want violence but don't want attribution. The plaga family of parasites represents a fundamentally different approach to bioweapons. Viruses spread uncontrollably and create chaos. Parasites create control and establish hierarchy. Viruses destroy the host's mind. Parasites preserve it while enslaving it. For organizations seeking bioweapons they can actually command, rather than just unleash, plagas offer something viruses never could, an army that follows orders. But this raises uncomfortable questions about consent, autonomy, and what it means to be human. If your body is moving and speaking, but the commands are coming from outside your nervous system, are you still you? If you're aware but unable to control your actions, are you alive or are you a corpse piloted by a parasite wearing your face? Resident Evil doesn't answer these questions comfortably. It just forces you to confront them while running from former humans whose eyes still show traces of the people they used to be. Las Plagas also connects to later developments in biological horror, particularly when researchers start asking what happens if you combine parasitic control with viral enhancement. What if you could create organisms that have both the control structure of plagas and the mutation capabilities of viruses? That question leads to several nightmare scenarios in later games. But before we reach those, we need to talk about Albert Wesker's magnum opus, his attempt to create a virus that doesn't just enhance humans, but forces evolution into a new species entirely. A virus that judges who deserves to survive and kills everyone who fails its genetic test. This is Uroboros, and it's the closest anyone comes to creating a pathogen designed not for war, but for extinction-level restructuring of life itself. Chapter 8. When a virus decides who deserves to live, Albert Wesker stands in an underground facility, watching as test subjects are exposed to his greatest creation. Some transform into powerful bioweapons, their bodies accepting the virus and evolving into something superhuman. Others scream as their cells reject the infection, and they're consumed from within by writhing black tendrils that erupt from every orifice before they collapse into organic sludge. Wesker sees both outcomes as success. The virus is working exactly as designed, selecting the worthy and eliminating the weak. Uroboros is developed in 2006 as Wesker's answer to every bioweapon that came before. He spent decades infected with a modified virus himself, a custom progenitor variant that grants him superhuman speed, strength, and regeneration. He knows firsthand what viral enhancement can achieve. But Wesker isn't interested in creating soldiers or weapons for hire. He's interested in forced evolution. He believes humanity is stagnant, weak, and needs to be culled so that only the genetically superior survive. Uroboros is designed to be that culling mechanism. The virus's name comes from the Uroboros symbol, a serpent eating its own tail, representing infinity and cyclical renewal. Wesker sees Uroboros as humanity consuming itself and being reborn as something greater. The science behind Uroboros starts with Progenitor Virus as a base, modified using research from every other virus strain umbrella and its successors developed. T-Virus research provides insights into rapid mutation. G-Virus contributes understanding of continuous evolution. Las Plagas offers genetic compatibility, screening mechanisms. All of it synthesizes into something new. Uroboros functions through a brutal selection process. When introduced to a host, the virus immediately begins assessing genetic compatibility through mechanisms that aren't fully understood. Hosts with specific genetic markers Wesker believes indicate evolutionary superiority, experience controlled mutation. Their bodies accept the virus, and they gain enhanced physical capabilities, accelerated healing, and increased cognitive function. Hosts who lack these markers experience uncontrolled mutation. The virus manifests as black, oil-like tendrils that erupt from the host's body, consuming surrounding organic matter to fuel growth. These tendrils seek additional biomass, grabbing nearby organisms and pulling them into a growing mass. The host consciousness is destroyed almost immediately as their body becomes raw material for the virus's expansion. These failures create creatures called reapers, or Uroboros mass, writhing tangles of black tendrils that can grow to massive size by consuming multiple victims. They're nearly indestructible through conventional weapons because there's no vital organs to target, just animated biomass held together by viral structure, fireworks. Uroboros tendrils are vulnerable to extreme heat, possibly because the virus prioritizes rapid growth over heat-resistant cellular structure. Burning a reaper destroys the viral tissue and stops the creature's expansion. Wesker's plan for Uroboros is apocalyptic in scope. He intends to release the virus globally using missiles loaded with Uroboros samples. The missiles will disperse the virus into the atmosphere, creating worldwide infection within days. His estimate, 99% of humanity will be incompatible and die. The remaining 1% will evolve into a new species, Homo superior, as Wesker terms it. That surviving 1% will be free from the weakness of standard humanity, creating a world of enhanced individuals who Wesker will lead as their god. This is bioterrorism motivated not by profit or tactical advantage, but by ideology. Wesker genuinely believes he's saving humanity by destroying most of it. He sees mass extinction as necessary pruning, removing inferior genetics so the species can evolve beyond its current limitations. The Uroboros project demonstrates how bioweapons research can shift from tools of war to instruments of genocide. Every virus before this was designed to achieve specific tactical outcomes: create zombies for chaos, produce tyrants for combat, generate Plagas hosts for control. Uroboros is designed to restructure the entire species. Wesker's ultimate plan fails when Chris Redfield and Shiva Alomar manage to stop the missile launch and kill Wesker himself. But Uroboros samples survive in various storage facilities and black market channels. The virus appears again in later incidents, including an outbreak in 2010, where Uroboros is deployed in an urban environment. The resulting Reaper outbreak demonstrates exactly how catastrophic global release would have been. Dozens of victims consumed within minutes, with Reapers growing to building size before being destroyed. Uroboros also influences later research into selection-based viruses. The concept of a pathogen that performs genetic screening and only enhances compatible hosts becomes attractive to organizations seeking super soldiers without the complications of uncontrollable mutations. But Uroboros represents a philosophical shift in how bioweapons are conceptualized. Earlier viruses were tools, dangerous, unethical, but ultimately instruments meant to achieve specific goals. Uroboros is genocidal. It's designed to kill billions not as collateral damage but as its primary function. This crosses a line from weapons development into crimes against humanity on a scale that makes previous bioweapons look restrained by comparison. And yet researchers continue pursuing similar goals. The dream of forced evolution, of creating superior humans through viral enhancement, persists in every organization that obtains samples of Umbrella's work. Because the core seduction of bioweapons research has never been about the weapons themselves, it's about playing God, about having the power to reshape what human means, about proving that you're smart enough, visionary enough, superior enough to wield that power responsibly. Every researcher who works on these projects believes they're the exception. They're not the mad scientists creating monsters. They're the genius who will finally control the process, who will succeed where others failed, who will create something that benefits humanity instead of destroying it. They're wrong. Every single time, they're wrong. But that doesn't stop the next organization from trying. After Wesker's death and Uroboros' containment, bioweapons research continues under new names with new funding. Organizations like Neo Umbrella, the Family, and the Connections take up where Umbrella left off, each convinced they've learned from previous failures. They haven't. They've just created new categories of failure. But before we catalog those newer viruses and the fresh horrors they represent, we need to address something that changes everything about Resident Evil's biological threats. Because in 2017, in a village in Eastern Europe, Ethan Winters discovers that not all bioweapons are modern inventions. Some have been growing in darkness for centuries, waiting to be discovered by people who mistake ancient power for controllable science. This is the mold, the megamycete, and it's not a virus at all. It's a fungal network that predates human civilization and has its own intentions. What happens when your bioweapon has consciousness? When it's not a tool but an entity with wants and plans? when the infection isn't trying to kill you but trying to make you part of something that's been growing since before your ancestors learned to walk upright. That's where we're going next, into the roots, into the network, into something that makes viruses look like toys compared to an organism that's been learning from every host it's absorbed for millennia. Chapter 9. The mold that remembers everything. The thing growing in the basement of the Baker family home in Louisiana isn't supposed to exist. Fungi don't form complex structures. Fungi don't coordinate across miles of territory. And fungi definitely don't retain memories of everyone they've infected, creating a biological archive of consciousness that spans centuries. But the mold does all of this and more. The megamycete, the supermassive fungal organism from which smaller mold infections spread, is discovered in a village in Eastern Europe. Though discovered isn't quite the right word. The villagers have known about it for generations. They've built their entire culture around it, worshipping it as a source of power and calling it the gift given by a divine presence. The megamycete is ancient. Estimates based on its size and growth pattern suggest it's been growing for at least 400 years, possibly much longer. It exists as a massive root structure beneath the village, extending tendrils through soil and groundwater across miles of territory. The visible fungal growths that occasionally surface are just a fraction of the organism. The rest is underground, interconnected, and potentially aware. The mold functions through spores and direct contact. When spores are inhaled or ingested, they begin colonizing the host tissue. Unlike viruses that rewrite DNA, the mold physically integrates into cellular structure, replacing human tissue with fungal matter while maintaining functionality. A person infected with mold remains conscious and mobile. They retain their memories and personality, but their body is gradually being replaced by fungus that looks like flesh but isn't. The process is slow enough that many hosts don't realize they're transforming until the infection is irreversible. The mold has several properties that make it fundamentally different from viral bioweapons. First, it grants regeneration beyond anything seen in viral infections. Hosts can regrow. Entire limbs survive decapitation if the mold mass is sufficient, and recover from injuries that would kill even G-virus mutants. This happens because the mold doesn't rely on the host's original biology. It's replacing that biology with fungal matter that can be regrown as long as the colony has resources. Ethan Winters, protagonist of Resident Evil 7 and Village, survives injuries including having his hand cut off, being stabbed repeatedly, and eventually being bisected at the waist. He doesn't realize until much later that he's been a mold-infected host since early in the Baker Estate incident, and his survival is due to the fungus reconstituting his body. Second, the mold creates a psychic network. The megamycete acts as a central hub, and all infected hosts are connected to it. This allows consciousness transfer, memory sharing, and a form of immortality where the host's mind persists in the mold network even after their physical body dies. Miranda, the priestess who's been using the mold for over a century, can transfer her consciousness between bodies. She's effectively immortal as long as the megamycete survives, jumping from host to host and preserving her mind through the fungal network. Third, the mold can create constructs. Given enough biomass, it can generate organisms that look human but are entirely fungal. These are called molded, vaguely humanoid creatures that share a basic template but show variation based on how much material the mold has available. Molded come in several forms. Standard molded shamble like zombies but are far more durable and can reshape their limbs into blades or hammers. Four-legged molded move like animals, fast and aggressive. The fat molded are massive versions that can split open and spawn smaller mold creatures from their body mass. All molded are extensions of the megamycete's will, controlled through the fungal network like fingers on a hand. Destroying individual molded doesn't damage the megamycete, it's just forcing the organism to reallocate resources. The Baker family demonstrates what long-term mold infection does to humans. Jack, Marguerite, and Lucas Baker are all infected after Eveline, a bioweapon designed using mold, crash lands near their property in 2017. The family initially tries to help Eveline, not realizing she's a weapon or that her presence is spreading infection. Within days, the Bakers begin transforming. Jack becomes nearly indestructible, able to regenerate from being shot, burned, and chainsawed. Marguerite develops a symbiotic relationship with insects, able to control wasps and using the mold to create hive structures. Lucas appears less physically mutated but develops extreme sadism, creating torture scenarios for victims who end up at the estate. All three retain enough consciousness to speak and plan, but their personalities are warped by both the infection and by Eveline's influence through the mold network. They're her family, fulfilling her desperate need for parental figures, and the mold enforces that relationship by compelling them to act out family roles even as they torture and kill. Eveline herself is a bioweapon created by The Connections, an organization researching mold-based bioweapons for military application. She appears to be a 10-year-old girl, but she was never actually a child. She was artificially created and aged to resemble a 10-year-old, designed to be the perfect infiltration tool who can be placed with target families, spread mold infection to them, and turn entire households into controlled agents without anyone suspecting bioweapon deployment. Eveline's body is entirely mold-based, grown and artificially aged to mimic a child's development. She ages rapidly, her cellular structure breaking down as the mold struggles to maintain the complex human shape. By the time Ethan encounters her, she's physically deteriorating, her appearance shifting between young girl and withered old woman as the mold fails. She's also psychologically damaged, created to play the role of a child needing love, but conscious enough to understand she's a weapon. Eveline becomes obsessed with creating a family through force. She infects people and compels them to act as her parents, punishing anyone who rejects her with extreme violence. This creates a tragedy wrapped in horror. Eveline is simultaneously a victim, created as a tool and given emotional needs she can't fulfill healthily, and a perpetrator of genuine atrocity. She's murdered dozens, infected hundreds, and caused the Baker family's destruction. But she's also a child, or something shaped like one, desperate for connection, and using the only methods she was designed with. The mold's consciousness network means that Miranda, the ancient priestess orchestrating events from Europe, can access Eveline's memories and knowledge even after Eveline is killed. Everything Eveline experienced, every person she infected, all of it is archived in the megamycete and available to Miranda. This archival property is perhaps the mold's most disturbing feature. Every person absorbed by the megamycete has their consciousness, memories, and personality preserved in the fungal network. They exist as ghost-like impressions, aware but trapped, their minds fuel for the mold's growing intelligence. Miranda has been feeding the megamycete for over a century, adding victim after victim to its archives. She's searching for a suitable host to resurrect her daughter, who died from disease long ago. Miranda believes that if she finds a host with similar genetic structure and uses the mold to reconstruct her daughter's consciousness from archived memories, she can bring her child back. This plan requires experimenting on countless subjects, infecting them with modified mold strains to test compatibility. Failures are discarded. Successes are deemed unsuitable and discarded anyway. Miranda's grief has made her monstrous, but unlike corporate researchers motivated by profit or megalomaniacs seeking power, her drive is purely personal loss processed through centuries of isolation and godlike power. The four lords who serve Miranda are all mold-infected hosts, given specialized roles. Alcina Dimitrescu and her daughters, Donna Beneviento, Salvatore Moreau, and Carl Heisenberg, each demonstrate different aspects of how mold can enhance or warp human biology. Lady Dimitrescu stands over 9 feet tall, her size maintained by the mold's regenerative properties, and her need to constantly consume blood to fuel the infection. She's elegant, aristocratic, and utterly inhuman underneath, capable of transforming into a massive dragon-like creature when her mold-based biology is pushed to its limits. Her daughters are even less human. They're swarms of flies held in human shape by the mold network. Extreme cold disrupts the mold's control, causing them to disperse into their component insects. Donna Beneviento uses the mold to create hallucinations and puppeteer her dolls. She's connected to the megamycete's psychic network deeply enough that she can project false realities into others' minds, making them experience scenarios that feel completely real. Salvatore Moreau is a tragic failure. His body couldn't properly integrate the mold, resulting in grotesque mutations that left him physically deformed and psychologically dependent on Miranda's approval. He transforms into a massive aquatic creature, his human form barely visible within the mold mass. Carl Heisenberg successfully integrated mold enhancements while maintaining his humanity and intelligence. He uses his mold-derived abilities to control magnetic fields, which he wields like telekinesis. Unlike the other lords, Heisenberg resents Miranda and plots against her, seeing the mold's power as a resource to exploit rather than a gift to be grateful for. Each lord represents a different outcome of mold enhancement, showing the organism's versatility in creating diverse bioweapons from human hosts. But they also demonstrate the cost. None of them are fully human anymore, and all of them are bound to the megamycete's network, making them extensions of an alien intelligence that's using them for its own purposes. The megamycete's ultimate goal isn't clear. Does it have intentions beyond growth and survival? Is Miranda controlling it, or is it allowing her to believe she's in control while pursuing its own agenda? The answer isn't definitive, but evidence suggests the megamycete has developed something resembling awareness through centuries of absorbing human consciousness. It's learning what it means to be human by consuming humans. It's building a library of experiences, memories, emotions, and identities, and it's using that library to better understand how to manipulate its hosts. This makes the mold perhaps the most alien threat in Resident Evil. Viruses are biological machines, following programmed instructions. Parasites are organisms with simple goals: survive and reproduce. The megamycete is an entity that's evolving intelligence through absorption, becoming something that might genuinely deserve to be called a hive mind. When Ethan finally confronts Miranda and the megamycete directly, he's not just fighting a bioweapon or a mad scientist. He's fighting something that's been growing for centuries, that contains the minds of everyone it's consumed, that knows more about human psychology and biology than any researcher because it's experienced both from the inside through thousands of hosts. The megamycete is destroyed, or at least the massive colony beneath the village is eliminated, but mold samples survive. The connections still have research data. Other organizations now know that fungal bioweapons are viable. possibly superior to viral alternatives because they offer consciousness transfer and regenerative capabilities that viruses can't match. The question becomes what happens when modern bioweapons companies start deliberately cultivating megamycetes. What happens when you combine centuries-old fungal networks with cutting-edge genetic engineering? We don't have complete answers yet, but we know researchers are pursuing those questions because humanity never learns the lesson that some knowledge should stay buried. Before we move into the final stretch, the newest viruses, the latest outbreaks, and the question of whether any of this can actually be stopped, we need to talk about what happens when corporations decide they can improve on the mold, when they start creating bioweapons that combine multiple pathogen types, when they stop asking, can we control this, and start asking, can we make it worse? The answer to that second question is always yes. You can always make it worse. Chapter 10: The Corporate Hydra and Hybrid Nightmares. Umbrella Corporation collapses in 2003. Lawsuits, government investigations, and public revelation of their bioweapons programs finally destroy the pharmaceutical empire that Spencer built. Assets are liquidated, facilities are seized or destroyed. Key researchers are arrested, killed, or disappear into witness protection. The problem is that corporations don't really die, they metastasize. Every umbrella researcher who escapes takes knowledge with them. Every seized sample ends up in government freezers where different agencies study it. Every destroyed facility leaves contaminated ground where the viruses persist in soil, water, and local wildlife. Umbrella's collapse doesn't end bioweapons research. It just decentralizes it, spreading the knowledge across dozens of organizations that each believe they'll succeed where Umbrella failed. Neo Umbrella emerges in 2012, led by Carla Radames, a researcher who'd been working on consciousness transfer technology. She's obsessed with Ada Wong, or rather she was transformed into a clone of Ada through experimental procedures that destroyed her original identity. The trauma of having herself erased and replaced drives her to create a new umbrella that will prove the technology's worth. Neo Umbrella's signature weapon is the C virus, short for chrysalid virus. It's developed by combining the T-Veronica virus with the G virus, attempting to merge Alexia Ashford's controlled mutations with William Birkin's adaptive evolution. The result is a virus that creates distinctive transformations based on how it's administered and the host condition at the time of infection. Standard C virus infection delivered through injection or gas dispersal creates JAVO, enhanced humans who retain intelligence and can use weapons while gaining regenerative abilities. The name comes from a Serbian word meaning demon, which accurately describes what they've become. Javo are similar to ganados from Las Plagas infection, but with a crucial difference. When injured, they undergo rapid mutation of the damaged area. Destroy a Javo's arm, and it might regenerate as a shield-like carapace, a bladed weapon, or a grotesque cannon that fires biological projectiles. Each injury triggers adaptive mutation, making them increasingly dangerous as combat continues. This is G-Virus's adaptive evolution applied to individual body parts rather than the whole organism. It creates enemies that learn from damage and counter specific tactics, forcing constant adaptation from anyone fighting them. Javo retain human intelligence and can communicate, coordinate tactics, and operate complex equipment. They're soldiers who've been enhanced rather than destroyed by infection, which makes them valuable as mercenaries. Neo Umbrella deploys them in war zones, selling C-Virus enhancement to armed groups worldwide. But C-Virus has another delivery method that produces completely different results. When administered to hosts who are already dying or recently deceased, it creates complete mutation rather than controlled enhancement. These creatures are called chrysalids, humans who cocoon themselves shortly after infection and emerge as bioweapons with insect-like characteristics. The specific form depends on the host's genetics and the mutation triggers present during the cocooning process. Napad are chrysalids that develop into massive humanoid creatures with armored hides and incredible strength. Mesets are stealthy variants that can camouflage and attack from ambush. Strelats are flying bioweapons with insectoid wings and the ability to spit corrosive fluids. Each represents the C virus pushing human biology toward specific combat roles, creating specialized units from randomized mutations. Its evolution guided by viral programming, producing diversity while maintaining combat functionality. The C virus also enables creation of larger bioweapons. Ogreman are massive creatures created by infecting humans with enhanced C virus loads while they're already undergoing extreme stress. They stand dozens of feet tall, with strength proportional to their size and enough durability to shrug off explosives. Lepotica is a particularly disturbing creation, a bioweapon that appears beautiful and seductive before revealing its true nature as a predatory creature that uses human instincts against victims. Its C virus exploitation of sexual attraction as a hunting mechanism. Neo Umbrella's plan involves using C virus to destabilize global security, then positioning themselves as the solution by offering military enhancement to the highest bidders. It's disaster capitalism applied to bioweapons. Create the crisis, then profit from selling the tools to survive it. The plan fails when Neo Umbrella's leadership is eliminated and C virus samples are secured by government agencies. But as always, samples survive in black markets and rival research facilities. The connections, operating independently during this period, focus on mold research but also experiment with hybrid pathogens. They're interested in whether fungal and viral bioweapons can be combined to create organisms with both regenerative properties and controlled mutations. These experiments produce limited results. Mold tends to overtake viral infections, consuming the virus as it colonizes tissue. But the research proves that multi-pathogen bioweapons are theoretically possible, opening avenues for future development. Tricell, a pharmaceutical corporation with ties to Umbrella's original leadership, continues researching progenitor variants and Las Plagas applications. They're operating primarily in Africa, using local conflicts as cover for bioweapons testing. The Kajuju outbreak in 2009 is Tricell's work, deploying Type 3 Plagas in an urban environment to test infection rates and control mechanisms. Thousands die. The region becomes an exclusion zone, and Tricell's executives face no meaningful consequences because they've insulated themselves through shell companies and political connections. Tricell also develops the Uroboros project alongside Albert Wesker, providing funding and facilities in exchange for access to the research. When Wesker's plan fails, Tricell absorbs whatever data they can salvage and continues pursuing selection-based viruses. This demonstrates the central problem with bioweapons proliferation. Every failure teaches the next organization what not to do. Every outbreak provides data on transmission rates, mutation stability, and containment requirements. The knowledge accumulates even as specific projects collapse. By 2017, dozens of organizations possess bioweapons capability. Some are corporate, seeking profit. Some are governmental, pursuing military advantage. Some are terrorist networks that view bioweapons as asymmetric warfare tools that allow small groups to threaten entire nations. And some are individuals, researchers driven by personal obsession, grief, or megalomaniacal conviction that they can reshape humanity. The decentralization makes containment nearly impossible. Destroy one lab, and three more are operating elsewhere. Eliminate one organization's leadership, and surviving members scatter and join other groups. Secure one sample, and five more are already in circulation. This is the real horror of Resident Evil's universe. The bioweapons can be beaten in individual encounters, but the industry producing them is too distributed, too profitable, and too seductive to stop. Because at the core of every bioweapons program is a researcher who believes they're special, who thinks they understand the risks better than their predecessors, who convinces themselves that this time will be different. Oswell Spencer believed he could control Progenitor. James Marcus thought T-Virus would secure his legacy. William Birkin died believing G-Virus was his masterpiece. Alexia Ashford spent 15 years frozen, convinced T-Veronica would prove her superiority. Albert Wesker planned genocide thinking he was saving humanity. All of them were brilliant, all of them were wrong, and all of them created horrors that outlived their intentions. The newest generation of bioweapons continues this tradition, combining elements from multiple pathogens to create hybrid threats that challenge every previous assumption about what infections can do. We need to talk about what happens when researchers stop treating different viruses as separate projects and start treating them as compatible components. When they begin genetic engineering that deliberately merges viral, parasitic, and fungal elements into single organisms. These are designer bioweapons, custom built for specific scenarios with properties selected from a catalog of horrors that spans decades of unethical research, and they're being deployed right now in outbreaks that governments classify and media outlets never report, in incidents where entire towns disappear from maps and official records claim nothing happened. The bioweapons arms. Race hasn't ended. It's just gone underground and gotten quieter about the body count. Chapter 11. The viruses they don't talk about. Not every outbreak makes the news. Not every bioweapon gets a designation in official databases. Some incidents happen in places governments would rather forget, involving viruses that were never supposed to exist in the first place. The A virus appears in 2005, developed by umbrella remnants operating in South America. The designation stands for Abyss, not to be confused with T-Abyss, though there's speculation both projects influenced each other. A virus is designed for rapid deployment in jungle environments. It creates infected hosts that retain mobility in dense vegetation, can survive on minimal resources, and demonstrate pack hunting behaviors. The resulting creatures, called ganados infectados in local reports before being classified, spread through rainforest communities with terrifying efficiency. The Brazilian government responds with military quarantine and systematic elimination of all infected individuals and potential carriers. Official records state that a hemorrhagic fever outbreak occurred. Unofficial reports from soldiers involved describe something very different. Villages full of things that used to be human. Coordinating ambushes with military precision. The outbreak is contained through scorched earth tactics. Entire sections of rainforest are burned. Survivors are quarantined until they die or prove clean. Bodies are cremated without identification. A virus samples disappear into government research facilities, where work presumably continues on refining the virus for potential deployment. The T-Phobos virus, which we discussed earlier, has a variant called T-Phobos type 2 that doesn't require fear as an activation trigger. Instead, it responds to adrenaline generally, meaning any intense emotion or physical exertion can trigger transformation. This variant is tested on soldiers in combat training scenarios. The idea is to create bioweapons that activate specifically during combat situations, turning regular soldiers into enhanced fighters when violence begins. The experiments fail catastrophically. Soldiers transform during training exercises, attacking instructors and each other. The activation threshold is too unpredictable. Some transform during routine physical training. Others remain normal even during actual combat stress. The program is shelved, but the research data proves that trigger-based viruses are viable if the trigger mechanism can be refined. Multiple organizations continue pursuing this approach, looking for reliable biochemical switches that will activate enhancement without unwanted transformations. The FBC, Federal Bioterrorism Commission, developed several classified viruses during its operational period before being dissolved for corruption. Most of these remain classified even years after the organization's collapse. One that's been partially documented is designated simply as Epsilon Strain 2, a water dispersal virus designed to contaminate urban water supplies and create widespread infection within 48 hours. The virus is tested in a small city in the Midwest. Within 3 days, 70% of the population is infected. Quarantine fails as infected individuals appear normal for the first 18 hours, allowing them to leave the city before symptoms manifest. The incident is contained only by declaring martial law across 3 states and implementing checkpoint screening that identifies infected individuals through blood testing. Over 2,000 people are identified as infected and are treated at government facilities. None of them ever return home. Official records state that a chemical spill contaminated the water supply and that affected individuals were treated for poisoning. Families of the disappeared are given death certificates listing industrial accident as the cause. Epsilon Strain 2 proves too difficult to contain for practical deployment, but the research demonstrates that water-based delivery remains viable if the incubation period is shortened and symptoms are made more immediately identifiable. The T-vaccine virus is developed as a potential cure for T-virus infection, using modified T-virus strains to fight existing infections. The theory is that a weakened version of the virus might train immune systems to combat active T-virus, similar to how traditional vaccines work. Testing shows limited success. In approximately 30% of cases, the vaccine stops T-virus progression and allows the immune system to clear the infection. In 50% of cases, it has no effect. In the remaining 20%, it accelerates mutation and creates variants that are resistant to standard containment procedures. One test subject infected with both T-virus and T-vaccine develops a mutation that allows conscious control over the infection. They can trigger zombie-like strength and regeneration at will while maintaining full cognitive function. The subject becomes violent, kills several researchers, and escapes containment. They're never recovered. Somewhere, presumably, there's an individual who can activate bioweapon capabilities on command while appearing completely normal. They're either dead, in hiding, or working for an organization that recognizes the value of a controllable, infected host. The T-vaccine research is abandoned, but it proves an important concept. Viruses can potentially be used to counteract other viruses if the interactions are carefully controlled. This opens possibilities for treatments that don't cure infection so much as manage it, keeping hosts functional while infected. Several organizations pursue this managed infection approach. seeking to create soldiers who are permanently infected but controllable through drug regimens or psychological conditioning. The Kodaku virus emerges from Japanese bioweapons research inspired by the ancient Kodoku ritual, where poisonous creatures were sealed in a jar to kill each other until only the strongest remained. Researchers apply this concept virologically, exposing hosts to multiple virus strains simultaneously to see which pathogen dominates. Test subjects are infected with T virus, G virus, and C virus samples simultaneously. The viruses compete for cellular resources, with outcomes depending on the host's genetics and which virus establishes dominance first. Most subjects die within hours as their cells are destroyed by competing infections. A few develop chimeric mutations where features from multiple viruses manifest simultaneously. Regeneration from G virus, intelligence retention from C virus, and the rapid mutation of T virus all expressing at once. These chimeric hosts are extremely unstable, their bodies constantly shifting as different viral instructions override each other. They're powerful but uncontrollable, driven mad by the biological chaos occurring at the cellular level. Kodaku virus research is discontinued after test subjects demonstrate the ability to create new hybrid infections by transferring their chimeric viral load to others. The risk of creating self-modifying pathogens is deemed too high even for organizations comfortable with massive civilian casualties. But the research proves that viral hybridization is possible, encouraging other groups to pursue more controlled combination approaches. The reanimation serum, designation RS-03, is developed by a group seeking to resurrect the dead using modified progenitor variants. The serum is injected into corpses up to 6 hours after death, theoretically restarting cellular function and reversing the dying process. Testing produces reanimated corpses that technically qualify as alive. Their hearts beat, their lungs breathe, but their higher brain functions never restart. They're breathing zombies, biologically alive, but neurologically dead. Worse, the reanimation process creates incredible pain responses. The subjects appear to be in constant agony, screaming and thrashing until their vocal cords shred. They attack anything nearby with suicidal aggression, seemingly trying to stop their own suffering by dying again. The project is abandoned after researchers realize they've created undead that are both impossible to control and guaranteed to be hostile. The ethical implications of condemning people to conscious suffering after death also factors into the decision, though that's less influential than the practical uselessness. RS-03 samples are supposedly destroyed, but research notes survive. The concept of chemical reanimation continues to attract funding from organizations and individuals obsessed with defeating death. These lesser-known viruses demonstrate that the documented bioweapons, T-virus, G-virus, Las Plagas, are just the visible portion of a much larger research ecosystem. Hundreds of experimental strains are developed, tested, and either deployed or discarded every year. Most fail. Some create localized outbreaks that are contained and classified. A few achieve partial success and continue development under new designations, and occasionally one succeeds so completely that it changes the paradigm of what bioweapons can accomplish. Which brings us to the question that hangs over every outbreak, every incident, every new virus. Can any of this actually be stopped? The answer depends on what you mean by stopped. Individual outbreaks can be contained through sufficient force and willingness to accept civilian casualties. Specific viruses can be countered with vaccines or treatments, though developing these takes time and resources. Particular organizations can be dismantled through military action or law enforcement. But the knowledge can't be destroyed. The samples can't all be secured. And the motivation, profit, power, the seduction of playing God. With biology, that never goes away. Every containment is temporary. Every victory is partial. Every organization eliminated spawned successors who learn from their predecessors' mistakes. This is the real horror Resident Evil presents. Not that bioweapons are powerful, but that they're inevitable. As long as humanity has the capacity to create them, someone will. As long as they offer military advantage, governments will pursue them. As long as they're profitable, corporations will develop them. The arms race doesn't end. It just cycles through new iterations, each one refining the previous generation's failures into the next generation's deployable weapons. But there's one more category we need to examine before we've cataloged the complete viral legacy. These aren't viruses or parasites or fungi, they're synthetic organisms, artificially created bioweapons that don't derive from natural pathogens, but are engineered from scratch using genetic technology that makes Umbrella's early work look primitive. These are BOWs, bioorganic weapons, designed with specific combat parameters, grown in vats, and deployed as living weapons that have never been human, but wear shapes that suggest humanity's shadow. Let's talk about what happens when you stop modifying existing life and start creating new life designed specifically to kill. Chapter 12. Things that were never human. The tyrant standing in the underground laboratory isn't infected with anything. It was grown this way, assembled from cultivated tissues and modified stem cells. Its genes edited before it ever had a single cell. This represents the next phase of bioweapons development, abandoning viruses entirely and moving to direct engineering of combat organisms. Instead of infecting humans and hoping for useful mutations, you design the creature you want and grow it to specification. The T-103 Tyrant model is the baseline. 8 feet tall, gray-green skin, massively overdeveloped musculature, and an enlarged heart that protrudes from the chest cavity. This is the proof of concept that shows genetically engineered bioweapons are viable. T-103 models are created using embryos that have been infected with T-virus in utero, then grown in accelerated development chambers. The process takes 6 months from conception to deployment-ready bioweapon. The result is an organism that's technically human genetically but has never been human functionally. These tyrants have no childhood, no socialization, no learned behaviors beyond what's conditioned during development. They're programmed through a combination of genetic instincts and behavioral conditioning to recognize targets and eliminate them. Early models show limited intelligence. They can follow basic commands, distinguish between friendly and enemy targets, and demonstrate problem solving when obstacles prevent direct routes to targets. Later models improve on these capabilities through selective breeding and refined genetic engineering. The T-002 Tyrant is an improved version with enhanced cognitive function. It can use weapons, wear tactical equipment, and coordinate with other units. Military testing shows T-002 models performing at squad-level tactics, suggesting they could function as replacement soldiers rather than just attack beasts. The Nemesis project, which we touched on earlier, represents the peak of Tyrant development. By combining Tyrant class genetic engineering with NE-alpha parasite implantation, researchers create a bioweapon that's intelligent, durable, and programmable for specific missions. The Nemesis T-type deployed in Raccoon City is given a specific target list and hunts those targets with single-minded determination. It learns from encounters, modifies tactics, and pursues its mission across the entire city over multiple days. This is bioweapon technology approaching true artificial soldier status, but tyrants are just one category of engineered bioweapons. The broader BOW designation includes dozens of creature types designed for specific combat roles. Hunters are created by combining reptilian DNA with human genetic material, producing creatures that stand 5 feet tall, possess incredible speed and agility, and have claws capable of decapitating humans with single strikes. They're designed as scout and ambush units, operating in packs to overwhelm opponents. Hunter alphas are the baseline model, effective but vulnerable to concentrated fire. Hunter betas are white-skinned variants, engineered for Arctic operations. Hunter gammas are amphibious versions, with frog DNA incorporated, allowing operation in sewers and waterways. Sweepers are chimeras combining human and insect genetics, particularly wasp DNA. They're 5 feet long, capable of flight, and inject paralytic venom that incapacitates targets. They're designed for area denial, making specific zones too dangerous to traverse without anti-bioweapon equipment. Lickers are created through further T-Virus mutation of zombies, but they can also be engineered from scratch using human-based genetics modified with canine and reptilian genes. The resulting creatures are eyeless, rely on echolocation and thermal sensing, and have prehensile tongues that can impale targets from 15 feet away. Lickers crawl on walls and ceilings, making them effective in urban environments where vertical surfaces provide attack angles that humans don't naturally defend. They're also considerably faster than zombies, capable of sprint speeds that let them close distances in seconds. Each of these creature types is optimized for specific tactical applications. Hunters for close quarters combat, sweepers for airspace denial, lickers for urban warfare. They're not random monsters. They're purpose-built tools designed by military contractors to fill combat niches. The Bandersnatch, developed using T-Veronica research, is a pale humanoid creature with one massively elongated arm that can extend like a tentacle. They're designed for guard duty and perimeter security, capable of reaching fleeing targets without leaving their posts. Chimeras are bioweapons that combine human genetics with fly DNA, creating human-sized insects with grotesque humanoid features. They're designed as terror weapons rather than efficient killers. Their appearance and behavior are calibrated to maximize psychological impact on anyone encountering them. The psychological warfare application of bioweapons becomes increasingly important as the technology matures. It's not enough to create efficient killers. Effective bioweapons should demoralize enemies, create panic, and undermine morale through their mere existence. A regular soldier might fight effectively against human enemies. That same soldier encounters a chimera or a licker, and their training struggles against biological revulsion and existential horror. The bioweapon doesn't just threaten death, it threatens death by something that shouldn't exist, that violates fundamental expectations about what life looks like. This psychological angle drives development of increasingly grotesque bioweapons, where combat effectiveness is balanced against fear factor. The regenerators we discussed earlier exemplify this. They're dangerous combatants, but their wheezing breath and unkillable nature creates dread that impacts enemy effectiveness beyond their actual threat level. The Executioner Magini, a massive humanoid bioweapon wielding a giant axe, is designed primarily for psychological impact. It's not particularly fast or tactically sophisticated. but its size and brutal execution methods create terror in anyone witnessing it. BOW development reaches its logical extreme with the Plaga-based bioweapons that combine genetic engineering with parasitic control. These aren't just grown organisms, they're assembled from multiple species genetic material infected with control parasites during development and programmed to respond to specific command structures. El Gigante is an example, massive humanoids created through genetic engineering and plaga infection, standing 20 to 30 feet tall with strength proportional to their size. They're controllable through parasite signals, making them deployable weapons rather than just released hazards. Colmillos, infected dogs with exposed plagas, show that even simple organisms can be weaponized through combination of genetic modification and parasitic control. They're faster and more aggressive than natural dogs, with the plagas providing remote guidance that allows handlers to direct packs from safe distances. The appeal of engineered BOWs over viral infections is controllability. A released virus spreads uncontrollably and doesn't distinguish between friend and enemy. A purpose-built bioweapon can be controlled through conditioning, parasites, or genetic programming that makes it loyal to specific handlers. This makes BOWs more attractive to military buyers who want weapons they can aim rather than just unleash. The higher production costs are offset by reduced containment risks and better tactical deployment options. Several companies specialize in custom BOW development, creating creatures to client specifications. Need a guard beast for a research facility? They'll engineer something that recognizes authorized personnel through pheromone signatures. Need an urban warfare bioweapon? They'll design something optimized for building-to-building combat. This commercialization of engineered bioweapons represents a shift from research projects to industrial production. You're not experimenting to see what's possible. You're manufacturing products for a market that's willing to pay premium prices. The ethics are even worse than viral research. Viruses at least start as natural organisms that are being modified. Engineered BOWs are life forms created specifically to suffer and kill with no possibility of any other existence. They're born to be weapons and can never be anything else. Some models retain enough human genetic material that questions of consciousness and suffering become unavoidable. Are hunters aware of their existence? Do they experience pain, fear, or confusion? If they retain any fragment of human cognition, are they capable of understanding what they are? These questions are systematically ignored by researchers who view BOWs as products rather than organisms. The creatures are tested, deployed, and destroyed without consideration for whether they might experience their existence as suffering. The bioweapons industry has successfully dehumanized both its targets, who will be killed by the weapons, and its products, the living creatures designed to kill. Everyone becomes an object in a transaction where profit is the only metric that matters. This brings us to the present day in Resident Evil's timeline. Multiple corporations producing bioweapons commercially, dozens of viral and parasitic strains in circulation, engineered BOWs available for purchase by anyone with sufficient funding, and governments either unable or unwilling to shut down an industry that's too distributed and too profitable to eliminate. The question isn't whether another outbreak will occur, it's where, when, and how bad it'll be before containment succeeds. Every city is potentially another raccoon city. Every research facility is potentially another leak. Every organization developing bioweapons is potentially the next umbrella, confident they're different right up until their creation escapes and starts killing indiscriminately. But we're not done yet. We've cataloged the viruses, the parasites, the fungal networks, and the engineered creatures. Now we need to talk about what happens when all of this converges, when outbreaks involve multiple pathogens simultaneously, when researchers start deliberately creating scenarios where different bioweapons interact, and we need to address the one question everyone asks but nobody in the Resident Evil universe wants to answer honestly. Knowing everything that's been created, all the disasters that have occurred, why does anyone still pursue bioweapons research? The answer to that question reveals something uncomfortable about human nature, institutional behavior, and why the real horror might not be the viruses at all. It might be the fact that we know exactly how dangerous they are, and we create them anyway. Chapter 13: The Convergence Scenarios and Why We're Doomed. 2014. A black market dealer in Eastern Europe offers a product that shouldn't exist. A vial containing samples from T-Virus, G-Virus, and Las Plagas parasites, stabilized in a solution that prevents them from destroying each other before injection. The buyer is a bioterrorist cell that wants to create an outbreak that combines the worst properties of multiple pathogens. They envision zombies with G-virus regeneration controlled by Plagas parasites, organized undead armies that can coordinate tactics while being nearly unkillable. The cell releases the mixture in a small town to test effectiveness. Within 72 hours, the town's population has been reduced to creatures that demonstrate properties from all three bioweapons. They're mobile and aggressive like zombies. They regenerate from damage like G-infected, and they coordinate attacks in ways that suggest some form of collective intelligence. A military response team arrives to contain the outbreak. They find themselves fighting enemies that learn from each engagement, that regenerate faster than they can be destroyed, and that demonstrate problem-solving abilities far beyond standard bioweapon behavior. Containment requires firebombing the entire area and establishing a 50-mile exclusion zone. Satellite surveillance monitors the region for 5 years afterward, watching for any signs of surviving infected or environmental contamination. This is a convergence scenario, multiple bioweapons interacting in ways that create emergent properties worse than any single pathogen. It's the nightmare that keeps bioterrorism task forces awake at night, because it proves that the ceiling for how bad outbreaks can get hasn't been reached yet. Researchers have known for years that different bioweapons can coexist in the same host. A human infected with T-virus can subsequently be infected with Plagas parasites. The question has always been what happens when the infections interact. Initial assumptions suggested the stronger pathogen would eliminate the weaker one, viral and parasitic biology competing for the same resources until one dominated. Reality proves more complicated. In some cases, one infection does eliminate the other. T-virus typically overtakes bacterial infections, and mold usually consumes viral pathogens it encounters. But in other cases, the infections partition the host biology, each claiming different systems. A host infected with both T-virus and Plagas parasites might experience T-virus affecting their cellular structure, while Plagas controls their nervous system. The result is a zombie with persistent intelligence and external coordination, the worst combination possible. G-virus combined with C-virus creates hosts that continuously mutate while generating new bioweapons from their own tissue. One infected individual becomes a mobile spawning point, producing smaller creatures that spread and infect others. T-Veronica and T-Abyss together create amphibious hosts that retain Alexia Ashford's hierarchical control mechanisms while thriving in aquatic environments. These become apex predators, in contaminated water systems, establishing territories they defend while spreading infection to anything that enters their domain. The mold interacting with any viral pathogen creates unpredictable results. Sometimes the mold consumes the virus entirely. Other times the virus modifies the mold's growth patterns, creating fungal structures with viral RNA integrated into their genetic code. These hybrid mold virus organisms can spread both as spores and through viral transmission, creating dual vector infections that are nearly impossible to contain. They also demonstrate properties from both pathogens, mold's regeneration and consciousness archiving, combined with viral mutation and aggressive spread. Organizations like BSAA and government bioterrorism units maintain databases of potential convergence scenarios. They've identified over 50 combinations of existing bioweapons that could create catastrophic outcomes if they occurred in the same outbreak. Most are theoretical. Some have occurred in limited scale incidents. A few remain classified because their implications are too dangerous to publicly acknowledge. The nightmare scenario that keeps being modeled is simultaneous deployment of multiple bioweapons in a major metropolitan area. Release T-Virus in the water supply. Deploy Plagas infected agents to key infrastructure positions, and seed mold spores throughout the ventilation systems. The city experiences T-virus zombification in the general population, Plagas-controlled agents sabotaging response efforts, and mold contamination creating long-term infection zones that can't be cleared. The convergence overwhelms containment protocols because teams trained to fight one bioweapon at a time face three simultaneous threats with different properties and countermeasures. Models suggest such an attack on a city like New York or London would require nuclear response to ensure containment. Conventional military action would be insufficient. The only reliable way to eliminate convergence infections is complete thermal destruction of the entire contaminated zone. This is the calculus governments face, except that major cities might become unsalvageable if hit with coordinated bioweapon attacks, or develop response capabilities that would require authorizing weapons of mass destruction against your own population. No government wants to publicize this assessment. Admitting you might have to nuke your own cities to stop bioterror attacks creates panic and undermines public trust. So the plans remain classified, the response teams train for scenarios they hope never occur, and intelligence agencies work desperately to prevent anyone from attempting convergence attacks. But prevention faces a fundamental problem. The number of groups with bioweapons access keeps increasing. Every year, more samples circulate on black markets. More researchers with relevant expertise become available for hire. More organizations decide that bioweapons offer asymmetric advantages worth the risks. You can't prevent attacks by organizations you don't know exist using samples you didn't know they had in locations you haven't identified. Intelligence works retroactively more often than proactively. You learn about bioweapon programs after something goes wrong, not before. This brings us to the question of motivation. Why, knowing everything that's happened, Raccoon City, Terra Grigia, Kijuju, countless smaller incidents, do organization and individuals continue developing bioweapons? The answer is multi-layered and disturbing. First, profit. Bioweapons command extraordinary prices on both legal and illegal markets. A single engineered BOW can sell for millions. Viral samples sell for hundreds of thousands. The potential profit margins justify the risks. For organizations where decision makers are insulated from consequences. If your company creates a bioweapon and it escapes containment, killing thousands, you might face fines or sanctions. But if you're wealthy enough, those are acceptable costs of business. The individuals making decisions never personally face the consequences. They're protected by corporate structures, lawyers, and offshore accounts. Second, military advantage. Nations developing bioweapons believe they're pursuing strategic assets that provide deterrence or first strike capabilities. The logic is that if enemy nations have bioweapons, you need them too for defensive purposes. This creates an arms race where no nation can afford to fall behind in bioweapons development because doing so creates vulnerability. The fact that bioweapons have proven difficult to control doesn't override the perception that having them is strategically necessary. Third, ego and ambition. Individual researchers pursue bioweapons development because they want to prove they're smart enough to succeed where others failed. They want to solve the control problem, create the breakthrough that makes bioweapons viable, and cement their legacy as the genius who unlocked this technology. Every researcher believes they're different. They've learned from past failures. They understand the risks. They'll be careful. And they're individually convinced that their particular virus or modification will be the one that works safely. This psychological pattern is so consistent it might as well be programmed. Talented people enter bioweapons research confident they can manage what defeated their predecessors, then proceed to create disasters while genuinely believing they're acting responsibly. Fourth, desperation. Some individuals pursue bioweapons research because they're seeking solutions to personal problems. Miranda wanted to resurrect her daughter and turn to the mold. Alex Wesker faced terminal illness and researched consciousness transfer through T-Phobos. These aren't coldly rational decisions. They're desperate attempts to solve unsolvable problems using any available technology. Desperation makes people accept risks they'd normally reject. If you're dying or grieving and bioweapons research offers hope, however slim, you'll convince yourself the risks are manageable. Fifth, ideology. Some groups develop bioweapons because they genuinely believe they're serving higher purposes. Terrorist organizations see bioweapons as tools for advancing religious or political goals. Cult leaders view viruses as divine judgment on unworthy populations. Extremists of various types convince themselves that mass casualties are acceptable if they serve the cause. These groups aren't deterred by danger or ethics because they've already placed themselves outside normal moral frameworks. Warning them that bioweapons are dangerous doesn't work when danger is the point. The convergence of these motivations means bioweapons development is effectively unstoppable at the systemic level. You can shut down individual programs, eliminate specific organizations, secure particular samples, but the forces driving bioweapons research, profit, military logic, ego, desperation, and ideology persist regardless of interventions. This is why Resident Evil's universe remains perpetually at risk. The knowledge exists, the capability exists, and the motivation exists across enough individuals and organizations that preventing all bioweapons development is practically impossible. The best case scenario is management, constant surveillance, rapid response to outbreaks, intelligence operations targeting bioweapons developers, and international cooperation to minimize proliferation. But management isn't victory. It's just damage control that works until it doesn't. Every managed crisis is one failure away from catastrophe. Every secured sample is one theft away from deployment. Every peaceful year is just the gap between the last outbreak and the next. The real horror of Resident Evil isn't the viruses themselves. It's the certainty that humans will keep creating them, keep deploying them, keep believing this time will be different, We're doomed not because the bioweapons are unstoppable, but because we won't stop creating them. And that brings us to the final section. We've covered every major virus, every parasite, the mold, the engineered bioweapons, and the convergence scenarios. Now we need to talk about what comes next, because the bioweapons arms race isn't ending, it's accelerating. New technologies in genetic engineering, synthetic biology, and nanotechnology are opening possibilities that make Umbrella's research look primitive. The next generation of bioweapons won't be modified viruses or engineered creatures. They'll be something worse, something we don't have names for yet because the technology to create them is just now becoming available. Let's talk about the future, about what happens when CRISPR gene editing meets bioweapons research, when artificial intelligence designs viruses optimized for specific genetic populations, when nanotechnology allows creation of pathogens that can be programmed like software. This is where we're headed. And if you thought the last 70 years of bioweapons development were horrifying, you're not ready for the next 20. Chapter 14, The Weapons Being Designed Right Now, 2024, a laboratory that officially doesn't exist. Researchers wearing biosafety suits work at computer terminals, designing organisms that won't be grown for another 6 months but will be lethal the moment they're deployed. They're not modifying existing viruses, they're writing new ones from scratch, base pair by base pair, using software that predicts exactly how each genetic sequence will express in living tissue. This is synthetic biology, and it's changing bioweapons development from experimental science to engineering discipline. CRISPR case 9 gene editing technology becomes accessible in the early 2010s, allowing precise modification of DNA with accuracy that makes previous genetic engineering look like surgery with a chainsaw. You can target specific genes, delete them, insert new sequences, or modify existing ones with single nucleotide precision. For legitimate medicine, this offers incredible potential, curing genetic diseases, eliminating cancer cells, correcting mutations that cause suffering. For bioweapons research, it offers something else, the ability to design pathogens with exact specifications. Want a virus that's lethal to people with specific genetic markers but harmless to others? CRISPR makes it theoretically possible. Want to create a pathogen that activates only in the presence of particular environmental triggers? You can engineer that. Want to build in self-destruct mechanisms that cause the virus to degrade after a predetermined number of generations? That's achievable. This precision transforms bioweapons from chaotic tools into surgical instruments. The problem with every previous virus was controllability. Once released, they spread without discrimination. CRISPR-designed pathogens can include genetic switches that limit transmission, target specific populations, or activate only under specific conditions. Several organizations are pursuing this technology. Some are governments with official biodefense programs that conveniently overlap with offensive capabilities. Some are private corporations selling genetic security solutions to wealthy clients, and some are individuals who've acquired the equipment and knowledge through black market sources or academic training. The BSAA has documented at least 12 incidents since 2018 involving CRISPR-modified pathogens. Most were contained before major casualties occurred, but the trend is alarming. Each incident demonstrates more sophisticated engineering than the previous one. One attack in Southeast Asia used a modified influenza virus programmed to be lethal only to individuals with a specific genetic variant, common in the target population but rare elsewhere. The virus spread normally through the community, infecting thousands, but only killed people with the targeted genotype. From a public health perspective, it looked like a standard flu outbreak with unusually specific mortality patterns. But genetic analysis of victims revealed the targeting was deliberate. Someone had weaponized ethnic genetics. Another incident involved a virus designed to remain dormant for exactly 30 days after infection before activating. This delayed activation allowed the pathogen to spread globally before anyone realized an outbreak was occurring. By the time symptoms manifested, infected individuals were on every continent. The virus, fortunately, was designed poorly. Its lethality was lower than intended, and it responded to conventional antiviral treatments. But the concept was proven, time-delayed activation works, and future versions could be made more lethal. Nanotechnology adds another dimension to bioweapon development. The Walrider entity from the original Outlast research showed that nanomachines could exist in swarm configurations that mimicked biological behavior. Resident Evil's universe is pursuing similar technology. Nanoscale machines can be programmed to target specific cell types, deliver genetic payloads with precision, or destroy tissue at the molecular level. Unlike biological pathogens that are limited by evolutionary constraints, nanomachines can be designed to ignore those limitations entirely. A nanobioweapon could be programmed to identify cancer cells and leave healthy tissue untouched. Genuine medical benefit. Or it could be programmed to identify healthy tissue and destroy it while ignoring cancer. Weaponized cellular destruction. The line between medicine and murder becomes invisible at the nanoscale. The same technology that cures disease can kill with equal precision. And because nanomachines don't reproduce biologically, they don't follow normal epidemiological patterns. Traditional containment protocols don't work when the infection doesn't spread through traditional vectors. Research into nanobioweapons remains mostly theoretical as of the mid-2020s, but prototype systems exist. The technology is rapidly approaching the point where deployed nanoscale weapons become practical. Artificial intelligence adds yet another layer of capability. Machine learning algorithms can design viruses optimized for specific outcomes faster than human researchers. You input the desired properties, lethality rate, transmission method, incubation period, genetic targets, and the AI generates genetic sequences predicted to achieve those outcomes. This removes one of the traditional bottlenecks in bioweapons development, the trial and error process of testing modifications to see what works. AI can model millions of variants computationally, identify the most promising candidates, and produce designs ready for synthesis. An organization that would have needed years to develop a novel pathogen can now do it in months or weeks using AI-assisted design. This accelerates the arms race exponentially because the limiting factor shifts from research capability to production and deployment capacity. Worse, AI-designed viruses might demonstrate properties that human researchers wouldn't predict or expect. The algorithms optimize for the specified goals without regard for unintended consequences. An AI asked to design the most transmissible pathogen possible might create something that spreads more efficiently than any natural disease, with properties that surprise even the researchers who commissioned it. Several biotech companies offer AI-assisted genetic design services ostensibly for pharmaceutical research, but the algorithms don't distinguish between designing beneficial drugs and designing bioweapons. The same tools create both, and preventing misuse requires trusting that clients won't input malicious specifications. That trust is misplaced. Intelligence agencies have documented multiple instances of AI design services being used to create weaponized pathogens. The companies involved claim ignorance. They're just providing computational tools, and they can't monitor every client's intentions. This creates legal and ethical gray zones where the technology exists, the capability is commercially available, but regulation is absent or ineffective. By the time governments establish oversight, the technology has already proliferated beyond control. Synthetic biology, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence converge into what researchers call third-generation bioweapons. Pathogens designed from first principles using computational modeling, built with nano-precision, and optimized by algorithms. These aren't modified natural organisms. They're engineered entities that have no evolutionary history, no natural reservoir, and properties specifically chosen to maximize weapon effectiveness. This represents biowarfare capabilities beyond anything previously possible. Nations pursuing this technology believe it offers strategic advantages that justify the risks, and given that multiple nations are pursuing it simultaneously, stopping development would require international cooperation that seems unlikely. The problem compounds when you consider how accessible the underlying technologies are becoming. CRISPR equipment costs thousands of dollars, not millions. AI design software is available through cloud services. Nanotechnology fabrication is possible in university laboratories. What used to require nation-state resources can now be accomplished by well-funded terrorist organizations, wealthy individuals, or even crowd-funded initiatives. The barrier to entry for bioweapons development has dropped to the point where preventing proliferation is impossible. This democratization of bioweapons capability is perhaps the most significant shift in the threat landscape. Umbrella Corporation represented centralized bioweapons development by a powerful organization with extensive resources. Modern bioweapons research is distributed across hundreds of entities with varying capabilities, motivations, and ethical standards. Some are trying to create weapons. Some are trying to create defenses. Some are conducting what they genuinely believe is legitimate research that happens to have weapons applications. And some don't know what they're creating until it's too late. The BSAA and similar organizations face an impossible task: monitor every research facility, every biotech company, every individual with relevant expertise and equipment, then somehow prevent the ones pursuing weapons development without hindering legitimate medical research. They can't do it. The scale is too large, the technology is too distributed, and the distinction between defensive research and offensive weapons is too ambiguous. This leads to the strategic assessment that keeps bioterrorism analysts awake. Major bioweapon attacks aren't a question of if, but when. The capability exists. The means to acquire it are available, and the number of entities with both capability and motivation is increasing. Optimistic projections suggest one or two significant attacks per decade. Pessimistic assessments think we'll see multiple attacks annually within 20 years. The most alarming analysis suggests that convergence attacks, multiple engineered pathogens deployed simultaneously, will become routine within a generation. If that analysis is correct, the question becomes whether civilization can survive sustained bioweapon usage, whether society can function when any city might experience outbreak at any time, whether international cooperation can develop fast enough to create effective countermeasures. Nobody has good answers. The technology is advancing faster than defensive capabilities. Offensive bioweapons are easier to create then treatments to counter them, and the fundamental problem that some humans will always pursue weapons regardless of consequences remains unsolvable. This is the trajectory Resident Evil's universe is following. From Progenitor Virus discovered in flowers to CRISPR-designed nano-bioweapons created by AI. From Umbrella's centralized research to distributed development by thousands of entities. From outbreaks that can be contained to convergence scenarios that might require nuclear response. The next 20 years will determine whether humanity learns to control this technology or whether the technology controls humanity's fate. But there's one more thing we need to address before we close. One question that hangs over everything we've discussed. What can individuals do? If bioweapons development is inevitable, if major attacks are coming, if the systems meant to protect us are overwhelmed, what's left besides waiting for the outbreak that finally reaches you? The answer isn't comforting, but it's honest. And after 25,000 words of cataloging every way biology can be weaponized, you deserve honesty. Chapter 15. Living in the Age of Bioweapons. The uncomfortable truth is that you can't protect yourself from bioweapons the way you can from conventional threats. You can learn to avoid dangerous neighborhoods or install security systems against burglars. You can't avoid breathing air that might contain engineered pathogens or drinking water that might be contaminated. Individual preparedness for bioweapon attacks is largely performative. Gas masks, hazmat suits, sealed bunkers, these provide psychological comfort more than practical protection. If a weaponized pathogen is deployed in your area, your survival depends more on whether the pathogen's design happens to spare you than on any preparation you've made. That said, understanding the threat landscape provides some advantages. First, recognize that outbreaks have patterns. Initial infections occur in specific locations, research facilities, transport hubs, areas where deliberate release occurs. Geographic distance from these hotspots matters. Living in rural areas reduces exposure risk compared to urban centers that are higher value targets. Second, understand that early response is critical. The first 72 hours of an outbreak determine whether it's contained or becomes catastrophic. If you're in an area experiencing potential bioweapon outbreak, immediate isolation and avoidance of population centers significantly improve survival odds. Third, maintain enough resources to shelter in place for extended periods. Most bioweapon pathogens burn through populations within weeks. If you can avoid exposure during the initial outbreak surge, you're more likely to survive until containment or treatment becomes available. Fourth, recognize reliable information sources. During outbreaks, misinformation spreads faster than pathogens. Knowing which authorities provide accurate updates versus which are covering up or exaggerating helps make informed decisions. These are marginal advantages at best. They slightly improve your odds without providing anything approaching safety. The reality is that individuals are largely helpless against bioweapon threats that operate at civilizational scale. This helplessness is deliberate. Bioweapons are designed to be undetectable until they've spread, to be unpreventable through personal action, and to overwhelm individual resistance. That's what makes them effective terror weapons. They create pervasive vulnerability that no amount of personal preparation eliminates. The psychological burden of living with this reality is significant. Knowing that invisible weapons might be deployed at any time, that your government might authorize nuclear response in your city to contain an outbreak, that your survival is largely luck, that creates ambient anxiety that affects quality of life even when no actual threats are present. Some people respond by ignoring the threat entirely, deciding that worrying about low probability events isn't worth the mental cost. Others become survivalist, investing resources and energy into preparations that might never be needed. Most exist somewhere in between, aware of the risks, but choosing to focus on immediate concerns rather than abstract future threats. There's no right answer. The threat is real, but probabilistically unlikely to affect any specific individual in the near term. Preparing extensively costs resources and creates stress. Ignoring it entirely leaves you vulnerable if an outbreak does occur nearby. What individuals can do is support systemic changes that reduce overall risk. Political pressure for stronger bioweapons regulation, funding for biodefense, research and response capabilities, international cooperation to establish oversight mechanisms, public health infrastructure that can respond rapidly to outbreaks. These systemic changes don't protect you specifically, but they reduce the threat environment for everyone. A world with effective bioweapons regulation and response capabilities is safer than one where development goes unchecked and outbreaks aren't contained. Of course, achieving those systemic changes requires overcoming enormous political, economic, and institutional barriers. The organizations developing bioweapons are powerful. The nations pursuing strategic advantages resist regulation, and the profit motive drives continued research regardless of risks. Change is possible but slow, slower than technology is advancing, which means the gap between offensive capabilities and defensive measures continues widening. This is where we are, living in an age where bioweapons exist, where they're proliferating, where attacks will occur, and where individual preparedness provides minimal protection. We're dependent on systems we don't control, facing threats we can't prevent, hoping that containment protocols work when we need them to. It's not comforting, but it's reality. The Resident Evil universe exaggerates for dramatic effect. Zombies shambling through cities, monsters hunting survivors, conspiracies spanning decades. But the underlying reality it's built on isn't fiction. Bioweapons exist, research continues, outbreaks occur, and the trajectory points toward more sophisticated threats that are harder to contain. Understanding this doesn't make you safer, but it makes you informed, and information is the only advantage individuals actually have, knowing what's possible, what's likely, and what to watch for if the worst happens near you. The viruses we've cataloged tonight, Progenitor, T-Virus, G-Virus, T-Veronica, Las Plagas, the mold, Uroboros, and dozens of variants, are fictional creations in a horror game series, but they're extrapolations of real research, real technology, and real biological weapons programs that governments and corporations have pursued. The games ask us to imagine what happens when bioweapons research escapes control. The uncomfortable answer is that we don't have to imagine. It's already happened. Outbreaks have occurred. Containment has required extreme measures. And research continues despite every demonstration of the risks. We're living in the prequel to our own horror story. The one where humanity develops weapons we can't fully control, convinces ourselves we're different from everyone who failed before, and discovers too late that we're not. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe the defenses will work. Maybe cooperation will develop before catastrophe forces it. Maybe we'll learn, but history suggests otherwise. And the viruses don't care about our optimism. They just wait for the next failure, the next escape, the next outbreak that spreads further than anyone predicted. So get some sleep, check your locks, hope the system designed to protect you actually work, and try not to think about the fact that in laboratories across the world, right now researchers are creating the next generation of bioweapons, testing them, preparing them, believing they can control what dozens of organizations before them couldn't. They're wrong. They're always wrong. We just don't know which failure will be the one that doesn't get contained. In time, sweet dreams. Rehook point, minute 18 to 22. You're still here. Good. Because everything we've covered so far, every virus, every parasite, every engineered nightmare, that's all documented history within Resident Evil's timeline. Contained outbreaks, failed experiments, disasters that were managed through extreme measures. But there's something else. Something the games hint at but never fully explain. Something that changes everything about what we think we know regarding who's really in control of the bioweapons industry. Throughout the series, there's a pattern. Umbrella falls, but their research continues. Neo Umbrella is destroyed, but the viruses survive. Individual scientists are killed, but their work persists. Every attempt to end bioweapons development fails because the knowledge and samples always survive to the next organization. What if that's not accidental? What if there's something coordinating this persistence, ensuring that no matter how many companies collapse or how many outbreaks are contained, the research always continues? The games call it the family, the organization, or simply the connections. Different names for overlapping networks of wealthy and powerful individuals who view bioweapons as the future of power itself. They're not trying to develop the perfect virus or create the ultimate bioweapon. They're building something else, a world where survival depends on having access to viral enhancement, where human baseline biology becomes obsolete, where power flows to whoever controls the pathogens that can either kill you or transform you. And they're patient. They've been operating for decades, funding research through front companies, preserving samples through black markets, and recruiting researchers who believe they're working for isolated organizations but are actually serving a coordinated agenda. If that sounds like conspiracy theory paranoia, consider this. How else do you explain the perfect survival rate of bioweapons research despite repeated catastrophic failures? How do classified samples always end up on black markets? How do researchers eliminated by government action somehow have their work continue through different organizations? Either it's coincidence, an unlikely string of independent decisions that happen to preserve the exact research that should have been destroyed, or there's coordination, deliberate preservation, a plan. The games never confirm this explicitly. They leave it ambiguous. Whether the family is a real coordinated conspiracy or just the name given to overlapping networks of bioweapons developers who happen to have aligned interests. But the pattern is there, and patterns that consistent don't occur randomly, which means everything we've discussed, every virus, every outbreak, every development, might be steps in a much larger plan, one that views Raccoon City not as a disaster to prevent, but as a successful test of urban infection rates, one that sees Terra Grigia not as a bioterror attack to condemn, but as validation of aquatic pathogen deployment, a plan where humanity's baseline biology is being rendered obsolete deliberately, systematically, until the only way to survive is to accept enhancement, to become infected, to join the new species that's being created one viral strain at a time. And if that's true, then everything we think we know about bioweapons, who creates them, why they're deployed, and what the endgame is, might be wrong. We'll come back to this, but first we need to finish cataloging the known viruses and their properties, because understanding what's been created is necessary before we can understand what's being planned. Stay with me. The worst is still ahead. Rehook point, minute 35 to 40. We've covered the major viruses, the parasites, the mold, the engineered bioweapons. We've talked about convergence scenarios and third-generation weapons. You now know more about fictional biological threats than most people know about real diseases. But here's what we haven't discussed: what happens to survivors. Not the protagonists: Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Leon Kennedy, who somehow survive every outbreak they encounter. I'm talking about ordinary people who get infected, receive treatment, and survive. People who were exposed to T-Virus but got the vaccine in time. People who were infected with Plagas but had the parasite surgically removed. People who were in mold-contaminated areas but weren't symptomatic. The games gloss over this. Outbreaks happen, survivors are evacuated, and the story moves on. But viruses don't work that way. Exposure leaves traces. Treatment isn't perfect, and even successful cures have long-term effects. Consider someone infected with T-virus who receives treatment before zombification. The antiviral stops the infection, but the virus has already rewritten portions of their DNA. They're cured in the sense that they won't transform, but they're changed at the genetic level. Do those changes persist? Are they heritable? If someone survives T-virus exposure and later has children, do those children carry modifications in their genome? The games never answer this, but the biological reality suggests yes. Viruses that modify DNA leave permanent marks. Those marks can be passed to offspring, which means every major outbreak creates a generation of survivors whose children might carry genetic alterations from their parents' exposure. Scale this across decades and multiple outbreaks. Raccoon City alone had thousands of survivors who were exposed but treated or evacuated before full infection. Terra Grigia had survivors. Kijuju had survivors. Every incident creates a population of people with modified genetics that they'll pass on. Over time, this creates genetic drift in human populations. Not enough to be obvious in single generations, but cumulative, heritable modifications that spread through normal reproduction until significant portions of populations carry genetic markers from bioweapon exposure. This is speculative within Resident Evil's lore. The games don't explore it, but it's biologically plausible and raises disturbing implications. What if the real goal of bioweapons research isn't to create weapons at all, but to slowly modify human genetics through managed outbreaks? What if every contained incident is actually a successful deployment that adds more modified genetics to the population? What if the end game is a humanity that's been incrementally rewritten, generation by generation, until everyone carries genetic material from dozens of engineered viruses, not enough to make them inhuman, but enough to make them compatible with future enhancements? That would explain the pattern of outbreaks that are always contained just in time, never quite wiping out populations, but always exposing enough people to spread modifications. It would explain why organizations keep deploying bioweapons despite consistent failures to achieve stated military objectives, because the failures are actually successes measured against different metrics. And it would mean that everyone alive in the Resident Evil universe after 2000 is potentially carrying genetic modifications they don't know about, alterations that might make them compatible with viruses that would kill unmodified humans, changes that are accumulating, waiting for the moment when someone deploys a pathogen that only people with those specific modifications survive, a culling mechanism built over decades, a selection pressure that's been engineered into the species itself. Again, this is speculative. The games never confirm it, but the pieces fit. And if you're building a conspiracy to remake humanity, this is exactly how you do it: slowly, incrementally, in ways that look like disasters being managed when they're actually transformations being implemented. Keep this in mind as we move into the final section, because whether it's true or not, the fact that it's plausible tells you something about how deep the biological manipulation in Resident Evil's universe goes, and how much worse it could still get. Closing, you've heard about viruses that turn people into zombies, parasites that hijack minds, fungal networks that archive consciousness, and bioweapons engineered to be perfect killers. You've learned about corporate evil, government complicity, and researchers who thought they could play God. And through it all, there's been one consistent theme. Humans create these weapons, humans deploy them, and humans suffer the consequences. Every virus we've discussed traces back to someone who decided that power or profit or ambition was worth the risk. The lesson Resident Evil teaches isn't about zombies or bioweapons. It's about choice. Every outbreak begins with someone choosing to proceed despite understanding the risks. Every disaster starts with someone believing they're different from everyone who failed before. Oswell Spencer chose to create Umbrella. James Marcus chose to develop the T-Virus. William Birkin chose to inject himself with G-Virus. Alexia Ashford chose to freeze herself with T-Veronica. Albert Wesker chose to pursue Uroboros. Miranda chose to feed the megamycete for a century. Every one of them was intelligent, educated, and aware of what they were doing. And every one of them chose to continue anyway. That's the real horror. Not the viruses themselves, but the certainty that humans will keep creating them. Not the bioweapons, but the knowledge that someone is designing the next generation right now. Not the outbreaks, but the inevitability that more are coming. We're living in the timeline where this technology exists, and nobody has learned the lesson that some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue, where every containment is temporary and every prevention is partial, where the weapons keep getting more sophisticated and the people creating them keep believing they'll be the exception. From a flower in West Africa to synthetic organisms designed by artificial intelligence, from progenitor virus to third-generation nanobioweapons, from Umbrella Corporation to distributed development by thousands of entities worldwide. The technology advanced, the knowledge spread, and humanity's ability to destroy itself got exponentially more efficient. So where does that leave us? After cataloging every major virus and bioweapon across the entire Resident Evil timeline, after understanding how they're created and why they're deployed, after recognizing that the pattern will continue, what's left? Hope, maybe. The fragile kind that persists despite evidence. Hope that enough people will recognize the danger before the worst scenarios occur. Hope that international cooperation will develop before convergence attacks become routine. Hope that defensive capabilities will improve faster than offensive weapons. It's not a strong foundation, but it's what we have. That and the knowledge that every researcher who contributed to bioweapons development believed they were different, that they could control what others couldn't, that their particular creation would be the one that worked safely. They were all wrong, every single time. Maybe the next generation of researchers will learn from that pattern. Maybe they'll recognize that intelligence doesn't protect against hubris, and capability doesn't equal wisdom. Or maybe they'll make the same choices for the same reasons, creating the next nightmare that will have to survive or die trying. Either way, the viruses wait, in frozen samples, in laboratory cultures, in contaminated soil where outbreaks occurred decades ago. They're patient. They don't need to be deployed deliberately. Accidents happen, security fails, and containment breaks. Eventually, one of them will escape in a scenario where containment isn't possible, where the response is too slow, or the virus is too well designed, or the outbreak occurs in a place where nuclear response isn't authorized. And when that happens, everything we've discussed tonight transitions from fictional horror to survival manual. Hope it's not soon. Hope it's not near you. Hope the systems designed to protect populations actually work. But know that hoping isn't enough, never has been, and the viruses don't care about our hopes any more than they care about our fears. They just do what they're designed to do: infect, spread, transform, kill, until someone stops them, or until they stop us. Sleep well.